Today I'm going to be upcycling this vintage jewelry box I picked up at Value Village for $9.99. I just find that it's really dated. It's kind of got that orange tinted stain on it, and the inside is all lined with that felt paper, and it's really stained and it's really dirty. I know I can upcycle it and make it pretty again. I always find these jewelry boxes at the thrift store, and whenever I see them, I always pick them up because they upcycle beautifully. I usually paint them, but I'm going to do a different twist on this one, and we're going to do some bleaching and try to lighten up this wood and just make it look like it's more modern. First job is to pull out all of this yucky material. These actually come out really easy. I just use a scraper and it's just lightly glued in there and you can just peel it away. It's a little bit of a job, but it's so worth it in the end. Sometimes you can save the inside of these jewelry boxes, but most of the time when I find them, they've been really well loved and they're usually really dirty. So I just like to take it right out. I don't usually see jewelry boxes this big, so when I saw this one with all the little drawers and the little slide out piece on the bottom, I knew I had to grab it. Now once we get all the big pieces of the paper out, it's a big mess here. Bear with me because it's worth it in the end. What you want to do is you want to spray it with a little bit of water because there's glue and paper that's going to be left in the bottom. And once you get it wet and let the water soak right through, you can scrape away that paper really easy, and then you have a nice clean drawer to work with. Okay, big job, but I got it all done. And now I'm just going to take a sanding block. This is just a 220 sanding block, and I'm going to clean out the inside wherever there was paper because you're going to have little bits and pieces here. And I'm also going to take off all of the hardware. There was lots of hinges and knobs. The knobs just pop out, and the hinges you just need a really tiny screwdriver. I have a little glass dish that I saved them all in because those screws are so small and I didn't want to lose any of them. Once I had all of those off, I'm taking my 220 sandpaper and I want to sand the whole thing until it takes off that top layer of varnish. Once we have that top layer of varnish off, when we apply the bleach, it will be able to penetrate into the wood. I've taken my spray bottle and I've mixed a solution of 50% bleach and 50% water. You want to make sure you do this in a well-ventilated area and you're not doing it somewhere where it's going to make a really big mess. I'm just doing it in my shed with the door open. You want to thoroughly soak that wood and let that bleach soak in, and it's going to lighten it as we let it sit and do its magic. Now it's already starting to work. This has been a couple hours and it is dried, and I'm just taking a sanding block again and just doing a light sanding, and then I'm going to spritz it again with that bleach and water mixture until I get the color of the wood that I'm looking for. And I'm just going to keep repeating this process, letting it completely dry in between until I like the color. And this took 3 applications of the bleach and water. Once I got the color that I was looking for, I rinsed it all really well in water to neutralize the bleach. I really like the color that I was able to pull from this. It almost has like a sun-bleached look. Now I want to line the bottoms of the drawers and the back of the jewelry box, and I found this beautiful scrapbooking paper at Michael's, and I picked it up, and that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to measure the drawers and the back and then cut the paper with my paper cutter. I've got them all cut out, and now I'm going to decoupage them on with my Mod Podge mat. You're just going to put a little bit in the bottom of each drawer and then just put the scrapbooking paper on top, and it'll adhere really well. And look how beautiful this looks. Now I have to come clean about what happened here. I put all of my hinges and my knobs in that little glass dish with a little bit of Javex and water, thinking I would only leave it for about 5 minutes and it would clean them all up. And I forgot about them, and this is the next day, and they had already started to go rusty. But actually, I don't mind it. I kind of like the look that it gave, and it gave it kind of that rusty, aged look. Everything is all put back together now. I've taken it out to my shed, and I'm going to give it a spray of this matte clear polyacrylic sealer, and I'm doing it on top of the paper too. I don't like using Mod Podge as a top coat. I like using the polyacrylic sealer. So here is the before. Remember the ugly orange paper that was really dirty and lined in all of those drawers, and that orange stain that I really don't like. And this is how I upcycled it. I love bleaching wood and the effect that it can give. Now, one thing I did find with these jewelry boxes is I realized they're not all made with the same type of wood throughout the jewelry box. So some of it lifted in different colors, but I like the variation that it gave. So if you see one of these jewelry boxes when you're out thrifting, grab it and give this technique a try. Hope you enjoyed today's upcycle. And if you like this content, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Next project is this vase. I picked it up for $4.99 at the thrift store, and I think it might have been 50% off. Not liking the green. I am going to do my sand paint technique on this, and I picked up what you always have to look for. In our Home Depot, they have an oops section where they've mixed up the wrong paint. You can get fantastic deals there, and I really like it's almost like a gray stone color. I'm going to mix some of this up into some sand paint and paint my vase. If you've never made sand paint before, you need to try it out. It works fantastic. I'll put a link down below in the description and you can get the recipe there. But what a fantastic color in the oops section. Always check it out. I think it looks just like cement, and it's gonna make this look like a real nice piece of stoneware. I've cleaned it really well with some alcohol, wiped it all off, and now I'm gonna start painting. First coat's on, and we've already got some texture being created. This will probably take 3 or 4 coats, and I'm gonna let it completely dry in between each coat. And here's after the second coat. Gonna let that dry and then put on the third coat, and we'll see what it looks like, whether that will be the final coat or not. I'm now ready for my last coat, and look at the texture that we've created so far. Now for my last coat, what I like to do, you always have to keep stirring this to bring the sand up and make sure it's mixed really well into the paint. But what I like to do with my last coat is I like to just dab it on, and it just gives that little bit extra grainy texture on top. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put on this last coat. What a lucky find, finding that gray paint in the oops section at Home Depot. I think it turned this vase into an amazing upcycled piece, and I love the texture. Have you ever seen an old, outdated fabric chair and thought it was hopeless? Well, think again. I found this thrift store chair for just $49.99, and it was half off on this day. I'm going to show you how to turn it into a modern showpiece. Using a simple DIY paint recipe, you can completely update old fabric without spending a ton of money. So don't overlook thrift store furniture. Stay with me, and I'm going to show you how to give it a whole new life. Before painting the fabric, I want to refresh the wooden parts of the chair. It has that dated orange varnish that I want to transform into a more rustic boho look. To do this, I'm using a 120 grit sandpaper to lightly sand the arms, legs, and rockers all down to the original wood. Taking the time to refresh the wood before painting the fabric is going to completely elevate the look of this chair, making it feel more modern and stylish. That glossy orange toned finish screams outdated, and removing it is a simple step that makes a huge difference in transforming this entire chair. Now the wood looks much better, and that beautiful natural grain can shine through. Since we've sanded off the top coat, it's important to reseal the wood to protect it. I'm using teak oil, which not only enhances the wood's natural beauty, but it also nourishes and preserves the wood by penetrating deep into the grain. If you don't have teak oil, no worries. You can always seal it with a water-based polyacrylic sealer for a durable protective finish. Now it's time to paint. I'm using painter's tape to cover the wood and protect it for a clean finish. Since this chair isn't very big, you can grab a paint sample. Pick a color and they will tint it and mix it for you. You're also going to need some fabric softener. To prep the fabric, fill a squirt bottle with warm water and lightly mist the fabric until it's soaked through, but not drenched down to the padding. Gently rub the fabric with your hands to make sure the water is evenly distributed. This step is crucial because wetting the fabric helps the paint mixture absorb better, allowing for a smoother, more even application. The moisture helps the fabric paint bond to the fibers, making the fabric more flexible and giving it a soft, durable finish once it's dry. To make fabric paint, start by pouring a half a cup of latex paint into a bowl and then add half a cup of fabric softener. If you're working on a larger piece of furniture, aim for a 50-50 mix of latex paint and fabric softener. Now mix the two together and it will start to get nice and fluffy, exactly what you want. This fluffy texture helps the paint adhere smoothly to the fabric. Fabric softener is the key to keeping the fabric flexible. It helps the paint bond without making the fabric stiff once it dries. And before diving in, it's always a good idea to test your paint mixture on a small hidden area of the fabric first. This will let you see how the paint reacts with the material and ensure it won't cause any unexpected changes in the texture or the color. It's a simple step that can save you from any surprises later on. Now we've evenly sprayed the fabric with water, it's time to start painting. Don't worry if the first coat looks rough. It's totally normal, especially when you're painting over a dark color. This process usually takes 3, sometimes even 4 coats, so be patient. As you paint, if the fabric starts to feel dry, simply grab your squirt bottle and mist it again to keep it moist. When using fabric paint, it's best to work with natural fibers like cotton, linen, or denim, as they absorb the paint well and stay soft after drying. These fabrics hold the paint and allow it to bond smoothly. On the other hand, fabrics like polyester or nylon don't absorb paint as easily and can end up looking stiff or uneven. It's also best to avoid high pile or plush fabrics like velvet or thick upholstery with lots of texture. These fabrics can be tricky to paint because the fibers don't hold the paint evenly and it can be difficult to get in all those nooks and crannies. The results might end up looking patchy or stiff. For the best outcome, stick to smoother, tighter fabrics that allow the paint to adhere more evenly and maintain a soft, flexible finish. There are so many furniture pieces at the thrift store or on Marketplace that we often overlook because the fabric looks dated. But with just a little DIY fabric paint, you can transform an old chair into a stunning, one-of-a-kind piece for a fraction of the cost of buying new. Plus, you're being eco-friendly and sustainable by giving furniture a second life instead of sending it to the landfill. This chair was definitely stuck in the 90s, but with a little bit of paint, time, and elbow grease, I saw the potential to turn it into something beautiful, a lasting piece for years to come. First coat is done and dry, and now it's time for the second coat. Letting the paint completely dry between coats is key for getting that smooth, even finish. As we go in with the second layer, we'll use that squirt bottle again to lightly mist the fabric, and this helps the paint glide on more easily, making it smoother and even as we cover the entire chair. Drying time usually takes between 1 and 2 hours, depending on your temperature and the humidity in your space. Rushing the drying process can result in uneven coverage or even paint streaks, so be patient and give each layer the time it needs to set properly for the best results. Sanding between coats can really help smooth out the surface and ensure paint adheres evenly. Use a fine grit sandpaper around a 220 grit to gently sand the fabric once each coat is dry. This helps eliminate any bumps or uneven spots. For this project, I didn't need to sand because the fabric on the chair was already very smooth, but if you're working with a more textured fabric, sanding can make a big difference in achieving a flawless finish. Here's the second coat finished, and you can really see the difference, especially from the back. I'm going to finish up the second coat, let it dry completely, and then move on to the third. If I'd chosen a darker color, I probably could have gotten away with just 2 coats to cover the fabric underneath, but since I'm working with a lighter shade, 3 coats are going to be necessary to get really great coverage. It's best to mix up small batches of this fabric paint as you need it, rather than making a large amount all at once. The paint doesn't store well, and if you make too much, you might end up wasting it. By mixing just what you need for each coat, you'll ensure you'll have enough for the project and avoid having any leftover paint that doesn't keep well. After the final coat, it's important to let the chair dry completely. Give it at least 24 hours to ensure the paint has fully set and the fabric stays flexible. Do not rush this step. To care for your newly painted fabric, be gentle when cleaning. Avoid harsh scrubbing or machine washing, as this could damage the paint. Instead, spot clean with a damp cloth or use a mild fabric safe cleaner on stains. If you need to wash the fabric, hand wash it or use a delicate cycle with cold water. Here's the final result. After 3 coats of fabric paint, I've transformed this dated 90s rocking chair into a beautiful modern piece with a fun boho vibe. So next time you're thrifting and spot a piece of furniture that's seen better days, don't pass it by. If the price is right, grab it and give this technique a try. And that's it for today's transformation. I hope this DIY fabric painting technique has inspired you to tackle some of your own thrifted furniture pieces. And first up, how to perfectly hang a large picture with 2 hangers. No guesswork, no frustration. I made this picture a while back and it's one of my favorites to hang over our bed, and here's how I get it perfectly positioned every time. Grab some painter's tape and place it straight across both hangers. Then use a pen, pencil, or marker to mark a dot right in the center of each hanger. No more lopsided frames or extra holes in the wall. This method gets it right the first time, saving you time and frustration. Plus it works for any frame with 2 hangers, so you're never going to have to guess again. Now this is where I want to hang it perfectly centered right over the mantle of our bed, so getting the placement just right is key. Next we want to find the exact center between the 2 hangers, so I'm grabbing my tape measure and I'm marking the middle right on the painter's tape. This step is key because we'll use that mark to line everything up perfectly with the back of the bed. Before I climb up, I'm taking these pillows off the bed because, knowing me, I'd totally trip if I left them there. Now I'm going to find the exact center of the bed mantle and I'm going to place a piece of painter's tape there. This step is key because it's going to give us a reference point to make sure that the picture hangs perfectly centered and balanced. It's always a good idea to use 2 hangers when you're hanging a large piece because with just one, it's going to tilt over time. So the 2 hangers give it that extra stability to keep everything straight, because we all know gravity isn't picky about where it pulls. Now I'm going to hold the picture up and get a feel for how high I want it over the bed. Once I've got that, I'm grabbing another piece of painter's tape to mark a reference spot on the wall. And then I'm going to take the picture down and peel off that first piece of tape we put on and place it on the wall at that reference point. Finally, I'll measure from the center of the bed to the center of the tape on the wall and make sure everything lines up perfectly. I know it sounds like a lot, but trust me, it'll all make sense once it's done. The nice thing about this technique is you can totally do it by yourself. No need for an extra pair of hands. And if you're anything like me, you don't want to wait around for your husband or someone else to be home to help you hang a picture. Now grab your level and make sure that piece of painter's tape is straight. This step is really important. If you skip it, your screws are going to end up crooked. If you don't have a level, no worries, you can use a tape measure instead. Just measure the same distance from the floor at both ends of the tape, and as long as those measurements match, you know your tape is level. My tape was actually a little off center, so I peeled it back, adjusted it, and lined it up. Once it's straight, press it down again, and we're going to be ready to hang. Now we're ready to go. We're going to take a screw, and where we marked the tape for the hangers, screw it in just a tiny bit, enough to mark a spot on the wall where they'll go. Don't screw it all the way in yet though. We're going to do this because we'll be using wall anchors since this picture is pretty heavy and regular screws just won't be enough to support it. Once those 2 screws are in place, it's time to peel away the tape, and now we've marked exactly where the screws and the anchors need to go. I've got my wall anchors here and they're easy to find at any hardware store or on Amazon. I'll drop a link down below in the description. We're using these because they're going to help support the weight of the picture, especially against the drywall. First, we're going to insert the anchors and screw them in until they're flush with the wall. And then we're going to add the screws, but just leave them sticking out enough to catch the hangers on the back of the picture. If you're more into using different products like other types of hangers or even screws that don't need anchors, go with whatever works for you. This is just what I found works best for me. The most important part of this method is getting those hangers in the right spot. And once you've got that, you're good to go. Now let's get this picture on the wall. It's super easy to find the screws and hangers on the back and just slip it right on. And look at that, it's nice and straight. We've hung this picture by ourselves right over the bed and it only took a few minutes. Such a simple technique and no need to stress about any complicated calculations to get your picture straight. It's really that easy. I've added some faux greenery to the top of it. It just gives it that extra pop and it really pulls everything together. It's this wicker stand and I've had this for a long time, probably almost 2 years. I keep looking at it and not quite sure what to do with it. And I think I've been inspired. I've just kind of had this piece of wood on the top and this plant on it, but because the top is broken. So let's do this upcycle. Let's fix this up. This is what it looks like on the inside. I just had this piece of wood here because the wicker is broken and the inside and the top is broken on it. And it's covered in this quilted material, but it's stained, it's ripped, it's in really bad shape. You can just imagine how beautiful this was when it was brand new. And it's all the glue has come loose. It really needs some TLC. And then the bottom, I just stuck a basket in here, but it's been tucked away in my shed. It's really dusty, but somebody had just kind of decoupaged or stuck down this piece of paper. And it actually has a little drawer in it. And the drawer is also lined. It's got this pink tape on it. So it really needs to have some TLC. So let's get to work. Obviously somebody maybe used this as an old sewing kit. There's a few little old buttons in the bottom. I'm trying to scrape out all the bits and pieces out of the top and the bottom here. So I squirted them with some hot soapy water. I'm gonna let them soak and then I'm gonna scrape at it and see if I can get it down to the bare wood. Now with the top, this is all coming apart. So I think I'm gonna cut this inside piece out and then I'll be left with the border and then I think I can put it back on the top. I got the inside of that wicker all cleaned out. It was really broken and really fragile, but I was able to save it and I think I'll be able to keep it on the top. Ultimately, I would love this to turn into a beautiful planter. I still got to clean out all the gunk and glue that's in here and on the bottom. I've got it cleaned up pretty good. I have no idea what kind of glue it was, but it was sticky. I love that natural wood on the bottom. The top is still got a lot of glue. I'm not sure if I'm gonna get much more out. And the drawer the same. It's got some really sticky glue. I'm gonna let it dry completely now and then go back at it tomorrow when it's dry, and I might take the sander to the wood a little bit and see if I can get more of that glue out. Now there's a handle on this side, but it's missing on this side. You can see that it's pretty rough. I don't want to touch it too much because it's fragile, but I'm going to cut this one off and I think I might incorporate it into the front. It's really easy to take off. It's just a little piece of wicker, came off really easy, and I think it would look really nice if I maybe put it on the drawer or put it on the front here, and I'll just use my hot glue gun and put it on. It also needs a really good cleaning, so I've just got a soapy rag and I'm just carefully just wiping off any dust or any dirt that it may have. Everything is dry. Now I cannot get a lot of this paint out of the top, but I don't think it's going to be an issue because if I'm turning this into a planter, it almost might make like a waterproof barrier. But the bottom piece of wood came up really nice. I'm not going to touch it. The wicker is really fragile. I have to be really careful because if I even bump into it, it's cracking and it's breaking off, as you can see right here. I lost a piece right here. So the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to seal it all up. I'm going to take this out into a well-ventilated area and give it a spray of my clear gloss over the entire piece. I know I had said that I was probably going to just glue this little handle on here, but I found a little piece of copper wire. I think it blends in pretty good, and I'm just going to use that and just attach it on the back. This turned out absolutely beautiful, and I'm mad at myself that I left it for as long as I did without upcycling it. It is fragile. It wouldn't stand up to any high use, but just to have it for a nice little plant stand, it's gonna work perfect. Fun upcycle. I found a candlestick and a glass bowl. We're going to incorporate these two together. I took the wooden candlestick outside and I gave it a coat of this beautiful blue spray paint. Once it was dry, I went in with my 80 grit sandpaper and I sanded that whole candlestick holder. And now we're going to get out that E6000 and we're just going to put it around the rim, and then we're going to place that glass bowl on top of it. Now you can also use a little bit of hot glue if you are in a hurry and you want it to stay put, and I don't find that it makes a difference with the E6000 not working, and you can move it around a little bit and not have to worry about it. But I left mine overnight, and now I'm just filling up with a little bit of dirt, and I had some succulents, and I'm just going to add the succulents in that little dish, add a few little rocks, and we have made a DIY terrarium with stuff that I have found at the thrift store that was a couple of dollars to put together. And again, this would make a fantastic gift for someone. Now we're back to those words. I printed this off on my laser printer, again on regular computer paper. This is just like Mod Podge. I got it at Michael's. It's actually the Deco Art brand, and I sized it to fit the front of that candle holder. And we're going to do that transfer method, letting it sit for 24 hours and then rubbing the paper off. Show you how you can create stunning custom signs without the need for a Cricut, stencils, or any fancy machines. We're going to be using simple materials and a little creativity, and we're going to transform this window into a beautiful piece of home decor. I found this window at the thrift store, and I'm just going to clean it up with a little bit of Windex, remove some of these stickers, and I'm going to show you how you can transform this into a beautiful farmhouse sign using a simple sticker technique with no Cricut and no stencils. You're going to need some label sheets. These are CD label sheets that I always find at the thrift store, and we're going to peel off the stickers. We're going to save the stickers for another project, and we're going to use that shiny paper. Now we're going to hop onto Google Docs. I've designed this farmer's market graphic, and we're going to resize it to fit our window before transforming it into stickers. If you're not familiar with resizing graphics, I have a full tutorial linked in the description to learn how to enlarge images. If you're interested in using this graphic, it's available for purchase in my Etsy store, or for Patreon members, it's in the graphic library. You can grab it, try this technique yourself with the exact same graphic. When looking for label sheets, I often find them at the thrift store. If you don't have any luck there, check your local stationery store or the dollar store for address label sheets, and you want that shiny paper underneath. Now that we have the graphic sized for our project, I'm going to load the label sheet into my laser printer shiny side down. We want to print on that shiny side, and as soon as I did, I realized my toner was getting really low. I need to buy some new cartridges, but I'm not going to worry about it because I think it's going to give it a vintage rustic feel, and I'm going to roll with it. But after this video, I'm going to be buying some more toner. This process unfortunately only works on a laser printer. Inkjet printers won't produce the same results. If you're serious about creating custom signs, consider investing in a laser printer. They've become much more affordable in the last recent years. Now that I have these all sized and printed, I'm going to cut them down, and you're going to make sure that you don't touch the toner, because if you do, it's going to rub off, and we want to be really careful that that doesn't happen. And now we need some shelf liner. I can always find mine at the dollar store. You can also find it in the kitchen section in Walmart. And we're going to cut the shelf liner the same size as all of the graphics. You want to make sure when you're picking up the shelf liner that you're buying the clear shelf liner. I've seen it where it's white or opaque, but you want to have that crystal clear shelf liner. I really love this technique because it's affordable. We don't need a Cricut, we don't need stencils, and you can make some really beautiful custom signs. Now take the shelf liner and peel back the backing and place it right in the center of that graphic. Being careful, you want to lay it nice and flat without any bubbles and wrinkles. And then I have an old credit card, and I'm going to press that shelf liner into those graphics really hard. We need that toner to transfer onto the shelf liner. So take your time, really press hard, and get that transfer to work really well. Okay, we're all set. It's all cut out properly. We have the shelf liner on top of all the graphics. Now we're going to go back again and really scrape with that credit card. This is probably the most crucial step of the whole process. Peel away the backing, and if you're seeing some toner that's still left, go back and press again with the credit card. Now we're going to cut off any of the extra around the letters. We're going to leave a little bit of that white around each letter. That's going to give it a little bit more stickiness where there isn't any toner from the transfer. And just take your time and cut out each letter. Now that we have them all cut out, we're going to measure these so they're spaced evenly and exactly where we want them on this window. Now, this is why it's really important in that beginning step to have your glass nice and clean, because we want these stickers to stick really well. I'm just using some masking tape and a measuring tape and measuring to make sure all my letters are exactly where they're supposed to be. And if they aren't, it's not a really big deal because these are stickers and you can peel them off and replace them where you want them. Or if you get tired of this sign, peel the letters off and make a new one. So you can see why I wasn't all that upset about them not printing out all that well, because I really think it does give it the rustic feel for this farmer's market sign. Now, one thing that I will mention is I made sure that these graphics are reversed. If you're buying this graphic in my Etsy store or you're a graphic club member, you're already getting a reversed file because we want these stickers on the inside of the window, not on the outside. So if we didn't reverse them, when we put them on, they would be backwards. You could just stick them on the front of the window, but I don't think it would look as nice. reason I like to leave a little bit of that clear around the letters is so they will stick better. But if you're finding they're not sticking all that great, use some spray adhesive or a little bit of glue stick, and you can use that and they'll dry clear and stick to your project, and they'll still be easy to peel off later also if you want to change up your sign. I have so many different graphic and photo transfer methods here on my channel, but this might be one of my favorite ones. So we're flipping the window over, and there you have it. How beautiful is this? This window that I picked up for $5.99 at the thrift store, made some graphics for it, and then put them on the inside of the glass, and it looks like they're old and they've been painted on, and it's so easy to do. So if you're a reseller or you're just starting into making signs, invest in a laser printer. So many possibilities. Next thrift store frame upcycle. This is an old antique frame. It didn't have any backing, but I love the ornate frame. And I've got a perfect thing that I can complete this project with. I first had to cut a piece of wood to fit on the inside of this frame. I had a piece of scrap veneer wood. I used my jigsaw to cut it to fit the frame. And then I found this tapestry at the thrift store. It was in with the linens. Gorgeous. Somebody has spent so much time on this, and I can't believe it just getting donated to the thrift store. I did an absolute happy dance, and I think it's going to be really beautiful to display in my fall decor. I'm going to make sure I'm putting this centered in that frame, and then I'm going to fold over that extra material. I'm not going to cut any of this because I don't want to do anything to the original piece in case I ever want to take it off and use it for something else. And then I'm using my staple gun, and I'm just going to really carefully pull it nice and tight and staple it all along the inside. So some other ideas when you're at the thrift store is to go into the scrap fabrics or linens or pillowcases or tea towels. There's so many that would look beautiful framed in those old vintage ornate wooden frames. So I love the way this turned out. Somebody has spent so much time creating this, and I'm glad that I was able to upcycle it and make it beautiful again. If you've got a picture with just one hook on the back, I've got a clever little hack for you. All you need is some toothpaste. Dab a small amount on the back of the hanger and then carefully press it up against the wall where you want your picture to hang. When you press the picture against the wall, the toothpaste is going to transfer, showing you exactly where you need to place the screw. As you can see, there's a small dab of toothpaste. This is your guide for where you're going to screw into the wall. Since this picture isn't too heavy, I'm skipping the wall anchor and just using a screw. Be sure to wipe off any extra toothpaste from the back of the picture and the wall, and you'll be all set to hang it up. No guesswork needed. It's such a simple trick and so satisfying when everything lines up perfectly and you have your photo hung exactly where you want it. I like toothpaste, but if you're in a pinch, chalk or soap works too, but toothpaste is probably what most of us have, and it does the trick. I'm going to work away on this ornate tray. I love the details in it, but I think I'm going to be able to make these details pop a little bit more. I'm going to use some wax. It's just an old pillar candle, and I'm just going to go along the edges a little bit so when I put the paint on, it won't adhere to wherever there's some wax. I'm going to put on a coat of acrylic metallic paint. This one is in spun gold. I've got 2 coats of gold on this and the candle wax underneath it, and I'm going to put another coat of the candle wax on top of this gold before I put on my last coat. Okay, and now I've got some baking soda paint mixed up, and I'm just going to put a coat all over it, just kind of slop it on. This is kind of a watery mixture of the paint, but that's okay. I didn't want it to be on thick. I wanted it to go on really thin because I'm trying to get a really aged kind of look on this tray. Everything is completely dry. I'm going to take my sanding block and just give it a light sanding, and anywhere that there was wax, that paint is going to come off and it leaves a fantastic rustic look. And I'm bringing up that gold and that black. Okay, I have this all finished and distressed, and I'm going to do a fun technique with this. I'm going to make these raised edges kind of look antique and rusty, and I'm going to do it with cinnamon and Mod Podge. Now I just put a little bit of the cinnamon in just a plastic dish, and I've got Mod Podge matte. You can also use school glue, that works fine too. And I'm just going to take a little paintbrush and just kind of rub it along wherever there's high spots. I want that Mod Podge just to stick on those places. I don't want it to be all over the whole project. So I'm just kind of, just lightly, just kind of brushing it on. I want it to give it a rusty antique look. I'm going to put some in the corners here and here. And then before it dries, you don't want it to dry because the cinnamon won't stick to it. I'm going to sprinkle the cinnamon on it, and it's going to give it a really neat aged look. I'm just going to get some underneath here. Okay, and then I'm just going to take a little pinch and just sprinkle it all over. I got all the cinnamon all sprinkled on. And now I'm just going to let it sit and dry. It's completely dry, and I'm just going to take an old paintbrush and just kind of wipe away any of that's still laying on top. And it leaves it looking nice and old and rusty. Added a little bit more Mod Podge and cinnamon. I wanted it to look a little bit more rusty, and I'm really happy with the way that it's turned out now. And now I'm going to put a graphic in the middle. This is the graphic that I'm going to use, Smile, Sparkle, Shine. This is just printed off on my LaserJet printer. If you've been following along, you know that I love my reverse Mod Podge transfer technique. That's what I'm going to do on this. And I'm just going to cut this out to fit my project, and then use my Mod Podge mat to place it on the tray. My tray is all dry, it's sat overnight, and now I'm ready to rub the graphic off on it. And this is all ready to seal with a polyacrylic sealer. And if you haven't tried that little trick to use cinnamon to make it look like it's rusty and old, give it a try because it works perfect. Lamps are something that we always see at the thrift store, and they're fantastic to upcycle, and there's so many different ways to do it. This one's really dated. It's going to need a paint job, and I'm going to do a little bit of work on the shade also. We're going to put a fringe on this lampshade. I picked up this macrame cord on Amazon. I'll put the link to that down below in the description, and you can just watch and see how I create this fringe. It's really easy to do, and it's better than me talking through it and trying to explain, where you can just watch visually. Now I have the fringe done. It's really easy to put together, simple macrame knots, and it's going to go around the width of the lampshade. The only thing that we have to do now is we're going to unravel all of these tassels. Magic of video, it's all finished. So now what I like to do is I'm going to take a comb and I'm going to comb out all of these tassels so they're nice and fluffy and they don't look like they've just been unraveled. You need a really sharp pair of scissors, and we're just going to trim this all along the edge so it's nice and straight. And now you can see how it's going to fit along that lampshade, and it's really going to make it look high-end. I'm going to use my glue gun, and we're just going to glue this tassel fringe on the bottom of the lampshade. And you don't have to use macrame cord to make a fringe like this. You can also use yarn. So if you have a stash in your craft room of beautiful colors, give a try doing this process, making a fringe with some of your yarn. Okay, we have that all finished. It does take a little bit of time, but it's certainly worth the effort. Now let's get working on the base of this lamp. The blue color of this lamp is really dated. I picked this up for $10.99, but it was 50% off that day. So I'm just going to really clean it up with an alcohol wipe, make sure there's no grease or residue on it, and then tape off the cord and the top of that light socket and get painting. I mixed together some of my homemade sand paint. I love the texture that this paint makes. I have a full tutorial on how to make this recipe. I'll put the link to that down below in the description. And you don't need to prep with this sand paint. You can just paint right on your project because it's a chalk paint base. You don't have to use white paint. You can use any color paint to create texture on your DIY projects. Once it's completely dry, I'm going to take my sanding block and I'm going to just lightly sand it, and anywhere where there's a little grain of sand, I'm going to knock the paint off the top of it so it gives it that speckled kind of brown look, textured look that looks like an old piece of ceramic. This is one of my favorite painting techniques and I use it a lot in my DIY projects. And now we're going to seal it up again with that polyacrylic sealer so the paint is sealed really nice, and if you ever want to wipe it down with a damp rag or dust it, you'll be able to without affecting the paint finish underneath. Also make sure that you're buying a product that is water-based. If you're using an oil-based sealer as a top coat, it's going to yellow over time on you and you don't want that to happen. And what do you think? I absolutely love it. The sand paint was the perfect choice, but the fringe finished it off so it really gives it that modern feel. Next time you're at the thrift store, look for a lamp to upcycle. This next DIY is a whole bunch of little bits and pieces that I picked up at yard sales. This old saucepan is going to be turned into a beautiful tiered tray. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up that handle into a C shape so it looks like it's attached to the pot instead of looking just like a saucepan. So I went rooting through my stash, and this is what I'm going to use for this project. An old vintage bundt pan, a spindle, some porcelain knobs, and that saucepan. We're going to get out the trusty E6000 and we're going to put this all together. I'm going to take the bundt pan, sorry I'm out of frame a little bit here, and I'm going to put the E6000 on the top of that bundt pan, and then we're going to place it right in the middle of that vintage saucepan, making sure that it's right where we want it, and then we're going to set it aside and let it dry completely. I wasn't in a rush with this project, so I left this until the next day before I went on to the next step. It's the next day. Now we're going to use those porcelain knobs as feet on the bottom of the bundt pan. Using that E6000 again, we are going to place one in each corner of that bundt pan so it acts like 4 feet on the bottom. I wanted these to stay put, so I used a little bit of painter's tape to hold them in place. And again, I wasn't in a hurry, so I left these till the next day until they were really dry. And now we're starting to get that resemblance of a tiered tray. And the spindle, I wanted to put in the top saucepan, put some E6000 on the bottom of it, and then put some painter's tape to hold it straight up. And this is what I created. I put in some faux flowers, some daisies in the top, a vintage doily, and a couple of my shelf sitters that I did with that Mod Podge transfer technique. And I think this is absolutely adorable. A great way to upcycle that old kitchenware that most people would probably just overlook. And I think this is going to look fantastic in a farmhouse kitchen. I'm going to put on a coat of flat white spray paint. The spray paint is all dry on this little cutie, and I'm going to put a coat of my white chalk paint over the whole thing now. My little toothpick holder is all dry painted, and I'm going to put a little graphic on it. I love this one, and I've made a little one to go on the little circle, and I'm just going to cut it out and apply it using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer. The graphic has sat overnight, it's completely dry, and now we're going to rub off the paper. Graphic's all ready. Now I'm going to seal it with some polyacrylic sealer. I got this candle at a thrift store, and this is an old saucepan that I don't use very much. I'm going to melt it down, and then I'm going to reuse the wick to put it in that little jug, that little ceramic jug, and then pour the wax over top of it, and I'll have a brand new candle to reuse. I'm just going to take this skewer and just break it in half so it's a little bit easier to work with. And then I have saved the wick out of that other candle that I melted down. And I'm just going to take some masking tape and just attach it to that skewer so it stays put, and then center it over that little vase. I've got that little wick secured right in the center with that little skewer and a little bit of masking tape, and now we're ready to pour in the wax. Love this upcycle. I think it's way cuter as a candle than it was as a toothpick holder. I'm sure you've all been to the thrift store and seen these wooden items that have that orange hue and just look really dated. I picked up these candlesticks, and I'm going to show you how you can transform them and make them look modern again. These were each 50 cents a piece, an amazing steal, but let's upcycle these. I'm going to scuff sand these with a sanding block. We don't need to really take it down that much, but just give it something so we can get that top layer of that orange tinted stain off. Now, by sanding these, it does work pretty well for bringing these back to life and making them look like they're not screaming 80s, as you can see here. But I'm going to show you how you can bleach wood and even bring it up to an even more nicer, modern looking piece that you would find at a big box store. This is just some bleach and some water, and we're just going to spray it on this candlestick and then let it sit. This works really well in a good ventilated area because it's bleach, so you don't want to be doing it right in your house and having that bleach smell go all the way through. I'm doing this out in my shed. The door is wide open, and it's going to prevent it from being really stinky. You're going to spray it, let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes, and then rinse it really well with water. And then if you haven't got the desired color, you can keep applying that bleach and water mixture until you get what you're looking for. So here is the finished candlestick. And what we're going to do now is we're going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer, and that will allow us to dust it or to have it more durable if we're going to have it in our home. And here is our candlestick upcycle. I love the color of this. It's gotten rid of that orangey brown tint, and it's much more pleasing being that bleached color. I love them. You're going to always find these at the thrift store, so give this technique a try. Okay, we're ready to start this project. I'm not sure about the frame. I might add another color on top once I get it all finished and I do my dried flowers and see what kind of colors pull out. I might put another coat on this, but for now I'm just going to set that aside and we're going to work on the graphics on this. So this was the inside of the frame. It's just the backer, and what I did was I put 1 coat of black chalk paint and then 2 coats of white chalk paint, and we're ready to put the graphic on. I made my graphics and then I've printed them off on my LaserJet printer, and you have to make sure that you reverse your text. I just printed this off just to show you the quote that I made. And in a field of roses, she is a wildflower. And I thought that was appropriate when I'm going to add all my dried flowers all along the bottom. And I printed it off on my LaserJet printer, reversed the text, and I sized it to the size that I wanted for this piece of wood. And we're all ready to put it on with the Mod Podge. I'm just going to cut it down to size so it fits better on the piece of wood. And I have a tutorial where I show you how I do my graphics and print them off on my Word program and reverse the text. I'll put a link up above here and down below in the description. So if you're unsure how to do that, you can go back and you can check that out. You're just going to put a light coat over the whole graphic and then put it on the piece of wood and let it set overnight. And then when it's finished, you're going to take a damp rag and then rub off the graphics. Okay, I have the graphics all on. I'm just rubbing out any wrinkles or bubbles. It's all good. I'm just going to set this aside, let it dry thoroughly. I usually leave it overnight, and then we'll be ready to rub the paper off and we'll have a beautiful graphic. Okay, this is completely dry. And now we're going to take a little damp rag and we're just going to dampen the paper just until you start to see the graphic show through. And I like to do it in sections. So I'm going to do this section first and work away at it, and you just rub it until all the paper comes off. And you just kind of go gently and just get the feel for it. And it takes a little bit of a knack and a little bit of patience, but it works perfect. And as you can see, as you work away, all that paper rubs off and then the graphic is left on your project. I have the graphics all done, and now we're ready to use the dried flowers that I pressed from my garden and some wildflowers that I found out and around my house. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of lay them out, see how I like them, and then I'm going to Mod Podge them onto my piece of wood. So it'll all be incorporated into one, and frame will then go on when it's all finished. So I'm just going to work away on these dried flowers and see how I like them. I have them kind of set where I think I want to put them. So I'm just going to take my time and just Mod Podge them onto that board. And I'll probably fiddle with it a bit, but I am loving the way that it's going to look and all the colors of those flowers. I have this set up so I have the base of the dried flowers of how I want them. I'm using my Mod Podge mat, and there's not really a real special technique to this. You just want to, now these are really brittle from when I dry them. I'm going to put a little bit on the back, just gently, because you don't want to break any leaves off. Just kind of pat it on and then flip it over and kind of just place it where you want it. And then just gently, just take your paintbrush and just add the Mod Podge. Make sure you have a real good coat on it so it's going to stay put. And then we're just going to just do section by section and layer it on. After seeing all the colors of the dried flowers come together, I think I want to make a little pop of color on the frame. So I am going to use my baby wipes, and I've got some pink acrylic paint, and I'm just going to dry brush just on top of it, because then I'll have like all three of these colors popping through. I'm going to have some pink, I'm going to have some black, I'm going to have some gray, and I think that'll really complement the wildflowers and the pressed flowers that I have on the picture. So I'm going to work away at that. And I think that was a really good idea to add a little splash of pink to the frame. I think it's going to look really good with all those dried flowers in that graphic. And I'm ready to put this into the back of the frame. It's all dry. Loving the pink. That was an amazing choice to do that. So I'm just going to put this in and then use my hot glue gun just to secure it back into the frame. I have a collection of some dried flowers, some faux flowers, and I think I'm just going to nestle them in between. It'll give it kind of more of a 3D look, and it might brighten it up a little bit, because I find some of the dried flowers, when I dried them, they kind of went a little bit darker. That's why I added a little bit of the acrylic paint to make the colors pop a bit. And I think this will finish it off really well. I'm just going to use hot glue from my hot glue gun and just kind of place them where I think it's going to look the best. And all finished, and that little splash of those artificial and faux flowers finished it off beautiful, and I love it. It's so whimsical and so bright, and I think it would look perfect in a little girl's room. Vintage cutting board. It's probably from the 90s. It needs a refresh. I'm going to give it a coat of flat white spray paint first to start it off. The spray paint's all dry, and now I'm going to put a coat of my homemade chalk paint on top of that. I'm ready to put the graphics on my cutting board. This is the one that I'm going to do. I made this one. I think it's really great for the kitchen or for a baker. I've put it into my Word program, reversed it, printed it off on my LaserJet printer on regular computer paper, and I'm just going to place it right on my cutting board with some Mod Podge mat. Now this is all ready. It's sat overnight for 24 hours. I'm just going to wet it with a wet rag and then rub off the paper, and I'll be left with fantastic graphics. And this is all finished and ready to seal with a polyacrylic sealer. All finished, and I love the way it turned out. Add a little bit of jute twine to the top. I'm loving this graphic, and I think it's way better than the before. Next upcycle is this nice wooden shelf that I found. I like it that the pegs are at the top, and what's also fabulous is the little pegs weren't glued in, so I can pull them all out, and it makes it so much easier to paint this board. I'm going to layer a couple colors on this using my candle wax technique and finish it off with some white chalk paint. This is just a pillar candle that I got at the dollar store. It works great for distressing wood. You just rub it along the wood wherever you think it would naturally kind of wear off. And when you paint it, wherever this wax is, the paint won't adhere to it. I guess I forgot to take the price tag off of this. I picked this up for $3.99 at Value Village. First color that I'm going to put on is some of my homemade black chalk paint. and I'm just going to paint the whole board. I'm actually not going to put the black paint intentionally along these grooves because I think that would be nice to leave that kind of that wood color. I'm going to put another coat of candle wax on top of the black that's all dry. And then I've got some green acrylic paint that I'm going to use. I think it'll be really nice to pop through when we're all finished. This is just actually Christmas green. And I'm just going to put a light coat over the whole board. It doesn't matter if I have every little bit painted because we're going to have this be really distressed looking. The green's all dry. Some more wax. You can never have enough wax when you want to create distressed paint. I get really aggressive with it because I love the look of the distressed wood, but you don't need to. If you like just a little bit, then just use a little bit of the wax. Okay, now we're going to put on our last coat, and I've got some of my homemade white chalk paint, and I'm going to put a good coat of that over the whole shelf. Okay, the white paint is completely dry. Now here's the trick when you're doing the wax technique. Take out your heat gun or your hair dryer, and you're going to warm up all of that wax that's been layered on this paint. And then we're going to take a scraper. This is just a razor scraper. You can use a regular scraper. And we're going to scrape away at that wax, and all those layers will show up. Okay, we've got it all scratched off and distressed, and we've taken that plain stained board and made it look really old and vintage. And now I'm going to put a graphic in the middle that just says welcome, and then put the pegs back in. I've just printed off a simple welcome, and I'm just going to use my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer to put it on the back, and I think I'm going to kind of center it so it looks nice with the pegs. So I'm going to put it maybe right about here. This is sat overnight. It's completely dry. I've just got a little bit of water and a little sponge. I'm just going to wet that until you can just start to see the graphics show through, and then rub off all the paper. And then once all the paper's gone, we're going to have a beautiful graphic on our coat rack. This technique takes a little bit of practice and just a little bit of patience, but once you get the hang of it, it works fantastic. These were done on regular computer paper on my laser jet printer. My graphic is all finished. It looks great. I really like it. I'm going to put a coat of the polyacrylic sealer over the whole coat rack. And then I'm just going to leave the pegs just that natural wood color. I like it just natural. And I've got a little bit of wood glue. I'm going to put a little bit of wood glue in each little hole, and then stick the post in, and it'll stay really secure. Just like that. I took a plain wooden hanger and turned it into a chippy, old looking piece. And I love that I just kept the pegs just the wooden color. I think that finishes it off nice. This has got a really shiny, glossy finish. So I'm going to put a coat of the bin primer on top of it so I can make sure that all of my paint is going to stick really well. The primer's all dry, and now I'm going to put a couple coats of this flat white on the Kleenex box. Everything's all dry, and I'm going to put one of my homemade napkins on this Kleenex box. I'm going to decoupage it on. If you haven't seen this tutorial on how to custom make your own napkins to decoupage, I'll put a link down below in the description and you can check it out. It's a really simple process, and it decoupages on so nice and smooth without any wrinkles, the way that I do it with the water method. And what you do is you just take this napkin, and you can see I've printed my graphics right on it, and I have a plastic sleeve that I'm placing the graphic facing down, and I'm just going to wet the edges with a stiff brush just to make the edges of the napkin kind of ragged so it blends in better when you put it on your project. I'm just going to dampen that napkin, get all the wrinkles out, and then place it on the project on top of some Mod Podge. This is all dry, and I'm going to give it a coat of polyacrylic sealer. Next time you're out thrifting, I'll bet you'll be looking for Kleenex holders. Isn't this adorable and so easy to upcycle? Do you still have a banana hanger in your kitchen and it's looking really dated? If you do, you might want to try this DIY. I found this one at the thrift store. It looks like it actually was homemade, and I'm going to give it a coat of black homemade chalk paint. It actually took 2 coats of that black chalk paint, and once it was dry, I went in with some 80 grit sandpaper and I gave it a really good sanding to give it that rustic look. I pulled a glass jar out of my recycling bin and I painted it with my chalk paint. I have a really great technique to paint glass and it won't chip at all. I'll put the link to that down below in the description. Now I'm going to add a graphic onto this glass jar. I've printed off, again, just like the other projects, on regular computer paper with my laser printer. You can also do this with an inkjet printer. It is a bit more tricky and the transfer is a little bit more faded. I have a video where I compared the two together. Again, down in the description, I'll put that video. If you only have an inkjet, you can check that out. Putting on my decoupage mat from DecoArt, which is the exact same as Mod Podge, centering it on that glass jar and getting all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, setting it aside and letting it dry for 24 hours. And did you know that you can also do graphic transfers with polyacrylic sealer? I did a comparison video using Mod Podge and polyacrylic, and it was pretty cool to see how well both worked. I'll put that down below in the description too, and you can check that out. Let's add a hanger on the glass jar. I'm just using some twine and my hot glue gun, and I'm just going to attach it so we can hang this from that banana hanger. Now let's seal everything up with this polyacrylic sealer. And by adding the polyacrylic sealer, it allows you to use a damp rag and wipe these down. It doesn't make it waterproof, but it makes it water resistant. And I had this faux succulent in my stash and it fit perfectly right into that glass jar. And we're now going to take that piece of twine and hang it from the banana hanger. And how cute of an upcycle is this? And it looks fabulous in my kitchen. Again, another great gift idea on a budget that you can find easily at the thrift store or in your recycling bin. Next project is this little glass vase. I fell in love with it. I have no idea what it was, and it has a hole in the bottom, hole in the top. Looks like a beehive, little things in it. It's really dirty, needs a really good cleaning. Picked it up for $3.99. I'm kind of wondering if it was something to catch bugs. If any of you know what this is, let me know down in the comments, but I have a wonderful idea on how to upcycle this. Okay, I've got it all cleaned up and ready to go. And I mixed up some baking powder paint. If you haven't tried this, I did a video not that long ago on how to make it, and it creates a fluffy, fantastic paint. That's what I'm going to use, and I love this yellow color. Let's get painting. This might take 2 or 3 coats, and this paint does not have a long shelf life, so only mix up as much as you need for your project, or it'll dry out on you. The first coat has dried, and now I'm going back and I'm just patting the paint on for the second coat, and it just kind of gives it that real kind of fluffy textured look. I think it kind of looks great. It makes this look more like a beehive. And that's the second coat on, and see how fluffy it is? I love it. My beehive is completely dry, and wow, talk about texture. I love it. And I'm going to make a little hang tag for it. I've just got a piece of MDF board. I'm going to paint it black, and then I'm going to put a coat of white chalk paint on it. And then I've got a really cute honey graphic that I'm going to put on the top of it. So I'm going to work away on that. My little tag has sat overnight. I've got my little dish of water. Just going to wet it so you can start to see the graphics through. You want to make sure when you're doing this technique, you don't put too much water on, so you can see how the graphics are just starting to show through. And then rub it off, and you have a graphic. So easy. My tag's all done, and I think it's adorable. I took a yellow marker and I kind of colored in the bee a little bit to give it a little extra touch, drilled a hole in the top, put some twine, and I'm going to attach it to my painted beehive. The texture that this baking powder paint made was perfect for this project, and I love that graphic. Next thing that I'm going to work on is these frames. I'm going to take the backing out and spruce up the frames. I picked these up at the thrift store for $4.99, and they were 50% off. So I thought that was a really good deal for some really good solid wood frames. And they just have staples in the back, just using my pliers, and I'm just gonna pull it out. I have them all taken apart, and actually the prints in them were little cards. They're kind of sun faded, but I kind of like them. I'm not gonna put them back in these because that's not kind of the style that I'm going for with these frames, but I'm going to tuck these aside because I'm going to use them for another project. Okay, now we're going to work on the frames. I want to keep this the color that it is, so I've got some painter's tape. I'm going to tape it off so I don't get any paint on it, and then we're going to do a distressed finish on the rest of the frame. We're going to use the candle wax technique. If you've watched my channel for a while, you know that I love doing this to create chippy layered wood. And I like being really aggressive with it because I love that chippy look on all of my projects. I know it's not for everyone, and you don't have to do this step. You can just, if you're redoing frames, you can just paint them just a plain color, but I like to add a little bit of jazz to it. I've got all the wax on, and now I'm going to put a coat of the black chalk paint over the whole frame. And wherever there's a little bit of wax, that paint is not going to stick there. So you're going to get that layered look of that paint color underneath. The coat of black is all dry. I'm going to use another coat of wax. Just going to kind of put it everywhere. And then I'm going to put a coat of white chalk paint on. These are all dry. We're going to use our packing tape to create the chippy layered look on this. We're having a snowstorm here. I don't want to take these outside to my shed and sand them. So when you use this technique, you don't have to use the sander at all. No mess. It's really easy, and it creates a fantastic finish. I've put the layers of wax on it. What I like to do, I like to heat it up a little bit with my heat gun so the wax kind of gets a little bit melted before we put on our packing tape. This is seriously so easy. You just get a piece of packing tape and you rub it right into the wood, and then you just take a corner of it and peel it. And as you do, you are left with a fantastic layered chippy look. Isn't that fantastic? So I'm going to work away on both of these frames. If you like this kind of look, you have to try this on some frames because it just works fantastic. Look at the chippy layered look that it gives. Okay, let's finish these off. You don't always have to do a transfer method or decoupage. You can just print off really great graphics and put them in a picture frame with glass. That's what I'm going to do with these. I designed these two graphics last week, and that's what I'm going to put in these frames. I'm just going to cut them to fit, and I think they're going to look fabulous with this rustic kind of frame. And we're just going to pull off the tape. I love that. I love the contrast of all the different colors. And they're all done. I love them, and I have a spot in my kitchen. I'm going to keep these ones for myself. This is adorable. It was a little bit rusty, so I cleaned it all off, gave it a little bit of a sand, and now I'm painting it with my homemade chalk paint. Once it's completely dry, we're going to put some graphics on with the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. I love this graphic, Farm Life, and I think it's really fitting for this shovel. I'm going to cut it in half because there's that little bit of the dip in the shovel, and I want the graphics to be able to form around it. Applied the Mod Podge, put it where I wanted it, let it sit for 24 hours, and then we're going to rub off the paper. Now, a little tip when you're doing projects like this, if you don't want the rust to leach through again, you can always use a spray primer first and then the chalk paint on top of it. I didn't use the primer because I'm okay if the rust does leach through. I sealed it up really well with some engine enamel because it's going to be out in the elements, and I think this is perfect to put out in the garden at the farm. You can just stick the end of the shovel into a bucket full of flowers. I have a little spot in my kitchen that I've always felt was a little bit dark, so I've been on the hunt for a wall sconce. I looked online, but I wasn't about to spend $50 or $60 on one, so I put it on my wanted list and kept an eye out. Well, today was my lucky day, and I found exactly what I was looking for at the thrift store for just $9.99, and I also had a coupon. I tested it before buying, brought it home, gave it a good cleaning. The only thing I wasn't crazy about was that gold color, so I decided to give it a quick makeover. I took off the hurricane lamp and the bulb, taped off the cord and socket, and I grabbed my matte black spray paint. A few light coats later, letting it dry between each one, and it looked so much better. I ended up putting on 3 coats to get really good coverage. I was really excited once it was dry to take off all of this painter's tape and see what it looked like all finished. And if you have a chance, go onto Amazon and price these, and you'll see why I thought that this was a really good deal grabbing it for $9.99. Once it was dry, I hung it up, but there was something bothering me, that darn dangling cord. It just looks so messy. So I had some cord hider from when we were hiding the cords for our TV that I purchased on Amazon. And these are great because they're just a plastic sleeve that tucks that cord away neatly, and you can even paint it to match your wall so it blends right in. To attach it, I used a removable double-sided sticky tape, which I've used before, and I love it because it doesn't damage the wall when you take it off. So if I ever want to move that lamp, it isn't an issue. I added some to each joint along the top and the bottom for extra hold. You just peel off the backing and press it on the wall where you want it. I used a level to make sure everything was straight, and then I pressed it firmly in place. Next, I threaded the cord through the hider and snapped the cover on. I even called my husband in to help because it was way easier to film him doing it than me trying to hold the camera myself, which is always kind of a struggle. This system works so well. I've used it to hide TV cords, computer cords, or just to organize a messy bunch underneath a desk, and it makes such a difference. I haven't painted the cord cover to match the wall yet, but I think I will. Even as it is, the space looks exactly like how I envisioned it. I'm so happy I waited and thrifted the perfect sconce instead of buying new. What do you think? And should I paint the cord cover or should I leave it as is? a wooden napkin holder, but I'm not going to use it as a napkin holder. I am going to make it into a place to keep my mail at my front door. I gave it a really good coat of my homemade white chalk paint. And then I designed a graphic that said mail. I thought that would be perfect for the front of it. I used my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method, stuck it on the front of that napkin holder, let it dry, and then I rubbed all the paper off, gave it a really good sanding so it was nice and rustic and chippy, and perfect spot to keep mail at the front door. That's pretty. The first thing that we're going to work on is this handsaw. I find these all the time at yard sales. Always pick them up because they make fantastic gifts for dads and grandpas and uncles. And I'm going to show you how you can turn this into a fantastic gift. The thing with saws is when you're painting it, you have to make sure that you're painting it with a primer, a spray primer first. If you don't, the rust leaches through and you don't get good coverage with your paint. I've already sprayed this, this was done quite a while ago, with some primer. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a coat of white chalk paint on top of this. I'm going to put a Grandpa's Garage graphic on this. I've printed this off. Make sure when you're using this technique, I'm using the Mod Podge reverse graphic technique, that you reverse the text. And I've sized it in my Word program to fit on the saw. This is all dry. It sat for 24 hours and I'm just dampening it and rubbing the paper off. If you see these out and about, I see them all the time in the summer at yard sales. Grab them. They're perfect gifts for people that are hard to buy for. And I also like making them into Christmas theme ones. These are so great to customize. You can do grandpa, papa, dad, workshop, garage, woodshed, anything. There's so many ideas. So I really enjoy doing these, and when I find them, I always do a little bit of a happy dance. And the heart on the back really dated it, so I took the heart off and I wanted to put just a plain piece of wood on the backing to replace where that heart was. Just took a couple finishing nails and tacked it in place, and it held it firmly, and now it is not dated at all. I took some of my homemade stain as the first coat, and then I dabbed on some Vaseline. I'm going to try to make a real kind of farmhouse feel shelf with this. Lots of rustic chippy paint happening. After everything was dry, I went over it with my homemade white chalk paint, gave it a really good coat, and when that was all finished, then I took it outside and I gave it a really good sanding to make it nice and rustic and chippy. And I'm going to do my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer on this. These graphics I've designed myself, and I'm going to put them right on that piece of wood that I put on where that heart was. I think it looks fantastic. I let it dry for about 24 hours and then I rubbed the paper off. This is the end result. And if you like any of these graphics that I've made, I'll put the links down below. They're in my Etsy store. Now, that heart that I took out of the middle of that shelf, let's upcycle it. I really banged it up with a hammer, made it really rustic, added on some candle wax, started layering my paint, put on a brown paint, some more candle wax, and then a nice blue turquoise color, and then candle wax, and then my last coat I put on some of my white chalk paint. And when you sand it, everywhere where there was that wax, it's going to chip off and leave those colors from underneath. Again, I'm doing my Mod Podge reverse graphic. I printed off the graphics, let them dry for 24 hours, rubbed off the paper. And how cute is
thrift
it?
Store, head to the children's section and look for some wooden building blocks. I'm going to show you how you can turn these into really cute shelf sitters, and these are also some of my best selling items. I gave these a light sanding with some 120 grit sandpaper, and then I painted them with my homemade white chalk paint, and I just did the face of each of these wooden blocks. If you are a reseller, this is a fantastic way to get all kinds of these little blocks that you can turn into shelf sitters and sell and make a profit. After the chalk paint had dried, I went back in with that sandpaper again and just made them a little bit rustic. I have a sheet of words in my Etsy store that is going to be fantastic for this project. I sized them up as best I could because some of the blocks are all different random lengths, but these are going to work really great to do my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method on these blocks. Twist here though, I'm not using Mod Podge because I couldn't find any at my local craft store, but they had this other brand that's the exact same as Mod Podge and it works just as well. I've printed off these graphics on my laser printer, making sure to reverse the text. If you grab these out of my Etsy store, they're already reversed, so you don't need to worry about that. Applied the product and then centered it on the building block and got all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it. And then we're just going to set them aside and we're going to let them dry until tomorrow. So next time you are at the thrift store, head right to the toy section and see if you can find a bag of these building blocks. I see them all the time. I always grab them and I always put these together because like I said before, these are some of my best sellers and I can bulk put these together and do them really quickly. It's the next day. I let them sit overnight. We're now going to take a damp rag with a little bit of water and we're going to wet that paper until the graphic starts to show through, and then just gently rub off the paper and the graphic is going to stay on that chalk paint underneath, creating the cutest little sign. I've got this one all done and now we're ready to put on a top coat, and I like using my water-based polyacrylic sealer. I've got a matte finish here. You can pick out the finish that you like for your signs, and I'm just going to put a light coat on this and set it aside and let it dry. We're going to work away at all of the others and you're not going to believe how cute these are. Going to put a nice graphic on this. I think I'm going to put a coffee graphic on it. This was, I think it might have been a teapot, but I have a really nice coffee graphic that I found on Design Space on Cricut that I'm going to use. It's really hard to do the Mod Podge transfer method or any sort of transfer method on a surface like this. It only works well for me anyways if it's chalk painted, and I wanted to keep the metal color, so that's why I'm going to use my Cricut. So we're going to cut it and get it ready to put on the pot. I'm going to clean my pot off with some rubbing alcohol and a little cloth. You want to make sure you have a really good clean surface before you put your graphics on. I've put some permanent vinyl on my mat and we're just going to cut it up and then I'll weed it, put some transfer tape on it, and then put it on our little pot. We're ready to put the graphic on. A little tip when you're trying to put graphics on and it's something round that rolls around, I like to weed and use a lint roller. Put the lint roller up against your project and then it won't roll around, and then you can take your graphic. It's a really cute coffee graphic. Make sure it's centered and lay it down on your project. I think this turned out really cute, and what an easy upcycle. I love the graphic, and you can either leave the lid on or take the lid off and put a faux plant in it. Either way, it's really cute for a farmhouse kitchen. This tool painted key holder. It had a few knots that were leaching through the wood and the paint, so I sanded it all down and then I wanted to seal it with some primer, otherwise those knots would just keep coming through. Once the primer was dry, I took my white chalk paint, gave it a coat of paint, took it outside and gave it a sanding, and then I'm going to do again my Mod Podge reverse graphics, and I just printed off the word keys. I thought that was nice and simple and would work great for this little key rack. Put on the Mod Podge and then pressed all the bubbles and wrinkles out, set it aside for 24 hours, and then the next day I came back and I rubbed off the paper, and here's the end result. Next project is a glass plate that I picked up at the thrift store. I think it might have been 50 cents, 75 cents, but I wanted to paint it white, and if you really want your paint to stick, put a coat of primer on first. I let the primer dry really well, and then I put a couple coats of my homemade chalk paint on it. After everything had really dried, I put on my Mod Podge graphics.
This is completely dry. I wanted to leave the back just glass, and I dampened my graphics, rubbed off the paper, and it turned out beautiful. And this is the pillar candle that I picked up at the dollar store. You want to make sure that you pick up a candle that's light in color for this technique. And we're going to custom make our own napkins, so you can put whatever you want on them and custom make them with names or pictures or graphics. Today I'm going to show you how I'm going to make one with one of my graphics. And you only want the back of the napkin, and then you want to iron the napkin flat. I'm just going to put a piece of parchment paper over top of it so we can get rid of the wrinkles before we go to use it. Just keep it on setting 6, no steam, and just get the wrinkles out of that napkin. And you want to be using a white napkin onto a white candle so it'll blend in really well. And now it's nice and flat, and it'll be really easy to work with. Now I've just got a plain piece of computer paper, and I'm using my crafter's tape, and I'm just going to put a little dab in each corner and on the side of the computer paper so I can stick the napkin onto it so it will go through my printer. This technique will work on an inkjet and a laserjet printer. And you just want to set down your paper right in the middle of the napkin and smooth it out so there's no wrinkles and no bubbles. And then we're ready to cut off all the excess napkin around the edge. And make sure you cut the napkin really close to the edge of the computer paper because you don't want any edges to get caught as it's going through your printer. These candles would be perfect for a wedding, baby shower, birthdays, just to give away as a gift because you can customize them with names, anything that you want. The possibilities are endless. Now I'm ready to put it through my printer. My napkin goes face down in this type of printer. Shut the door and we're ready to print my graphic on it. And there we have the graphic printed on the napkin, ready to use on the candle. And now I'm just going to cut around the graphic, just leaving a little bit along the edges. It'll blend in really well when we put it on the candle. And now we're just going to take the napkin off the piece of computer paper and we're ready to put it onto the candle. Now for this step, you're going to need wax paper. This is really important. You actually need the wax paper because we need the wax on the one side to help melt the napkin into the candle. So you want to take a piece that's a little bit bigger than the candle to wrap around. And you'll notice on the wax paper, you can feel the waxy side and the paper side. The wax side, you want to go in towards the candle. So we're going to place a napkin, and I got a little bit of static in my napkin here, but we're going to place a napkin exactly where you want it on the candle, and then we're going to take the wax paper and press it down firmly against that napkin. You want it nice and flat with no wrinkles, no bubbles. Get it laying right tight to that napkin. And then you're going to grab the excess wax paper at the back to hang on to when you're heating it. I like to use a dish towel to hang on to it, or you can get an oven mitt, but you want to have something because it does get quite warm when you're using the hair dryer, so you want to protect your hand from the heat. And then you're just going to take your hair dryer on the highest setting and just gently go back and forth over the napkin and the candle. Don't hold it in one spot too long because you'll actually melt the candle too much. You just want to go back and forth really gently, and as it's starting to melt, you'll notice that the napkin will change color and it'll get darker, so you can tell that the wax paper has melted into the napkin and the napkin below is starting to melt. Just take your time and go back and forth really slow. You don't want to put too much heat on this at once or you will wreck the candle and you'll melt it too much. And you can see how it's starting to get darker now. That means that it's working and starting to melt into the candle. This is such an easy DIY and it is so fast and so easy to do. I am having a lot of fun making a lot of candles. And you can see how dark the lettering is now, so you know that it's almost finished and almost ready. And now you're just going to gently peel away that wax paper and the napkin will be adhered right to the candle. And that's it. That's all you have to do. And if you don't want to make your own custom napkins, you can just use a napkin with a pattern on it right from the dollar store. And always remember, never leave a candle unattended. I've burned these before, never had any problem with the napkin applied to these. But just be mindful when you're using them. Most of these I just use as decor and I actually don't even light them. So head to the dollar store, pick up some of these candles, or look at the thrift store next time you're there and pick up some of the candles there and give this technique a try.
Do you know you could DIY your own labels using packing tape? I picked up these glass jars. I'm going to keep them in my kitchen pantry, but I want to custom make some labels for them, and I'm going to show you today how easy it is. Now this will only work with a laser printer. It will not work with an inkjet printer. You're gonna need some packing tape. I've printed these labels off with my laser printer on regular computer paper. You're gonna need a credit card and a dish of warm water. This graphic is available in my Etsy store. I think it's 4 or 5 sheets of all common words of things that you would have in your kitchen or your pantry that you can make labels with. I'll put that link in the description and you can check that out in my Etsy store if you're interested. I've also sized these to the size that I wanted in my Google Docs, and now we're ready to turn them into labels. This is just regular packing tape, and I've cut a length a little bit bigger than the graphic. I've put a little dime on the table because when you're pressing it down, it makes it easier to peel the tape off afterwards. Just a little crafting hack. And then take a card and really press that tape into that piece of paper. You want it to be really bonded well with that packing tape, and you can see how much easier it is to peel that tape off with that little dime underneath. We're now ready to turn this into a label. Before we do that, we're going to finish up some more, and same process. Use your packing tape, press it down really firmly onto the paper, and once we have these all made, we're going to then get that dish of warm water and you just soak them in the water. You're going to let them sit for about 30 to 60 seconds, depending on how thick your paper is. And once that has happened, we're going to take it out of the water and you're going to rub the paper off the back. And as you do that, it's just like magic. The graphic is going to stay on the tape, but the paper is going to rub away and the tape is going to remain sticky. So you're creating a label that you can put on your glass jars or bottles and display them in your home or in your pantry, in your kitchen. Add it to your junk journals, mixed media. It's just limitless what you can do with this fun technique. Once we have all the labels finished, you can go in and you can neaten them up and make the lines nice and straight before you add them onto your project. And after the labels have dried, the glue reactivates in the tape and you're able to tape it onto your glass jar or your glass bottles and it's going to stick. And the nice thing about this is if you change your mind, you can peel the tape off, you can make another label, or you can change up your decor. This is probably one of my favorite DIYs that I do. It's so fun. It makes everything look nice and neat and organized. And it's also a really great DIY to do with kids. You could print off their name. They could add it onto their books or their backpacks. Fun, DIY. Now here is the graphics that you're going to get out of my Etsy store. I'll put the link down below. There's all kinds of them, so you can label everything in your kitchen or your pantry and have fun doing it. Always find wooden candlesticks and wooden bowls at the thrift store, and I'm going to show you how we can incorporate these two together into a beautiful piece of home decor. We're going to use some E6000, and we're going to put a little bit around the rim of that candle. Now we're going to flip the bowl upside down and center that candlestick right in the middle of that bowl. Then we're going to set it aside, let it dry until tomorrow. Now, honestly, this looks beautiful just the way it is. I don't even need to paint it, but it was really scratched up and dinged. It's hard to tell on the camera here, but they were both in pretty rough shape. So I got out my beeswax stick and I'm just rubbing it everywhere where this would have naturally aged if it was really old, and then applying it all over the bowl in the candlestick. And then I'm going in with my black homemade chalk paint, and I'm going to give one good coat over the entire piece. I want this really chippy and rustic looking, so I'm actually doing two techniques to achieve that look. I put on the beeswax that you saw in the beginning, and now I'm putting on some Vaseline. Same thing, I'm just kind of putting it here and there wherever it would have naturally aged, and then we're going to get the wood color showing through and the black color showing through when we're finished and we distress this. I got out my white homemade chalk paint, and I gave a coat over the entire piece. If you have not made your own chalk paint, you should give this recipe a try. I'll put the link for my favorite recipe down below in the description. It's a really affordable alternative to buying store-bought chalk paint. Now this is dry completely, and I'm going in with a sanding block. This is an 80 grit sanding block, and we're just gonna knock down the Vaseline and the wax, and it's going to expose those two colors underneath, giving this a really rustic feel. Now again, you can stop at this step, but I find in my area when I put a little graphic on my projects, even if it's just one simple word, they seem to sell better. So I'm going to put the word grateful on the middle of this bowl. I've got some Mod Podge now. We've printed this off on a laser printer, making sure to reverse the text, and we're spreading that Mod Podge across that whole piece of paper. I got a little bit messy on this one, and we're going to center it in this right in the middle of that bowl. We're going to press out any bubbles or wrinkles, making sure that it's nice and smooth, and then we're going to set it aside and let it dry completely. It's the next day. We have a little dish of water, and I'm just going to dampen that paper until you can start to see the graphic show through, and then we're going to rub off the paper. This is a really easy graphic to rub off. There's not very much paper. It's just a small word, but it really looks cute in the bottom of this bowl. I have some live videos where I did this technique in real time, and it really is helpful to watch those if you're trying to master this technique. I'll put a link to some of those down below in the description. Now we're ready to seal this all up. I'm using my polyacrylic sealer, matte finish, and we're just going to apply it all over the bowl and the candlestick holder. These make excellent gifts, and they're really affordable, and you can always find these at the thrift store. So give this project a try.
Is this little ceramic container that had milk on it. I didn't really care for the colors of it. Took it outside, gave it a spray paint of my matte black, and then when that was all dry, I gave it a coat of my homemade chalk paint. It took 2 coats of the homemade chalk paint, and the milk was raised on this little container, and I wanted it to kind of stand out. So after all of the chalk paint had dried, I'd sponged on a little bit to give it a little bit of texture. I took some black acrylic paint on the sponge and just dabbed it over that raised milk. I thought that was easier than trying to hand paint exactly where those letters were, and then afterwards I just took the paintbrush in and just kind of cleaned up around the edges where the black had kind of spilled onto that white paint. It worked really well. I took my sanding block and I roughed up all around the edges to make that black paint peek through, and I thought it made it look vintage and old. I wanted to make a little hang tag for it. I printed off a picture of a cow, and I went around the edges of the tag with a black marker so it looked a little bit aged. Added some twine and some embellishments, put it on the top of that little container, and I think it looked fantastic. Oh, I also added a few beads that I painted, and so cute and so easy to do. to add to your farmhouse decor. I love picking up vintage frames, yard sales, garage sales, thrift stores. Always pick them up, always have way too many. Had this in my stash, and I'm going to turn it into a beautiful sign. I want to change the color of the frame a little bit. It didn't have a back, so I cut a piece of wood to fit into the back, and I'm going to incorporate this old horseshoe that I found. It's seen better days, but it's going to look beautiful when it's all finished on this sign. Everything's going to get a coat of my black homemade chalk paint, so I'm going to go ahead and start doing that. Everything's got a coat of black. I didn't completely cover it. I wanted a little bit of that white to peek through. And my piece of wood that I cut for the center, I'm going to put a coat of white chalk paint on that, set it aside. But the frame, we're going to get working on doing some fantastic distressing. I always get so excited when I have a project like this and I can start layering up colors and painting techniques, and excited about what it's going to turn out like. I've got a couple different colors. I've got a yellow and I've got a rust color. I used this on another sign that I made last week. I loved it. So I'm going to use these colors again, and I'm just going to kind of hit and miss. I don't have to cover it completely, just here and there. And then when this color is dry, then I'll do the same thing with the yellow paint. That color's all dry. Now we're going to just splash on a little bit of this yellow. We've got all those colors all layered on, and now we're going to use hairspray. If you didn't see my tutorial on how to distress wood using hairspray, I'll put the link down below in the description. Works fantastic, and it creates a beautiful crackle finish. What you want to do is you want to spray your hairspray over the entire frame and give it a really good thick coat. And then once you have it all covered, you want to let it dry completely. Our hairspray is completely dry. Now I find this technique works best with acrylic paint on top. So I've got some white acrylic paint, and you just want to do long strokes. You don't want to put too many back and forth motions in it, because we're trying to get a really nice crackle finish. And if you work it too much, you won't get the crackles showing up. So I'm just gonna do long strokes over the whole frame until it's completely covered. And you can miss spots here and there, because this is all about having a rustic finish. And I also find that this process works better if you use a heat gun to now dry that paint. If it dries faster, the crackles come out better. So I'm just going to put my heat gun on a low setting. You don't want to hold it too close, and just dry. And as you dry, those crackles will appear. And look at the crackle that hairspray made. I just love using that, and it just makes everything look very authentic. I'm going to distress it a little bit more. I have a squirt bottle, just some water in it, and I have a stiff stencil brush. I'm just going to spray the water on the high areas and then just wipe away with the stiff brush, and it just takes away that really stark painted edge and makes it look a little bit more worn. So I'm just going to work away on that. And after I've wiped off the area with my brush, I just like to take the sandpaper. This is just, I think it might be a 80 grit, and just lightly kind of just touch it on the high areas. I've got it the way I like it. I've just got a rag. I'm just gonna wipe it all down, dry it really well, and then I'm gonna seal it with my polyacrylic sealer. I designed this graphic. I'm gonna use my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. Live like someone left the gate open. I think that's really appropriate with the horseshoe, and I'm gonna apply it onto the base of the frame. My graphic has sat, it's all dry. I'm gonna take a damp rag and just dampen it so you can start to see the letters show through, and then start rubbing off the paper. Got everything all coated in polyacrylic sealer, the frame and the sign. And now I'm just going to adhere my horseshoe onto this with some E6000 hot glue, and it's gonna be all finished. I love it. I love the way that this turned out, and that painting technique really perked up that frame. The little horseshoe, that was something that somebody probably threw out and didn't think there was any potential to it. And I thought it would look perfect with this quote. Packed a lot in here, so hopefully you're still all following along because there's some really great ideas for inspiration. This was really dated, scream 90s with that heart in it, but I knew I could work around it and make it into something with a lot of farmhouse charm. I spray painted it with some matte black spray paint, and then I just took my candle wax and I went crazy. I put candle wax all over it everywhere, and then I just started to layer up my paint. I'm just using some acrylic paint that I had left over. Acrylic paint, and then candle wax, and then acrylic paint, and then candle wax, and I layered up a whole bunch of different colors, letting them completely dry in between each coat. White is going to be my top coat. I'm going to let it completely dry, and then I took my scraper and I scraped off and I sanded off anywhere where there was wax. That paint color that was underneath is going to pick through. I picked out one of my favorite farmhouse graphics that I have out of my Etsy store. That's what I'm going to put on the top of this stool. Use my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer. Get it all even, exactly where I wanted on that stool. Left it. And then the next day I came back, I rubbed off all of the paper, and then I sealed it up really well with some polyacrylic sealer. Full of chippy layered paint, and I love it. Next project. I think this came off of a broken piece of a clock. I tucked it away because I knew I could use this piece for something. Not loving the heart here. So I'm going to take it out to my shed and I'm going to cut it straight across here and get rid of this heart. And then I'll have a nice square to put a picture in the middle. So I took this out to my shed and I just drew a line across the bottom here and then cut off this heart. And now we're left with a way more modern looking frame than with this. But I'll still keep this. I'm going to tuck it away. You never know when you can use a cut off heart for a project. I'm going to put a coat of my black homemade chalk paint over the whole frame, and then I'll put a little bit of candle wax on it, and then I'll cover it up with the white chalk paint. I don't want this really distressed, so I'm just going to put a little bit of wax just along the edge and around the corners, because I just want that black just peeking out just a little bit. So that should be enough. And I had a piece of really thin wood, and I just cut it out to size to fit on the inside. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everything a coat of my white chalk paint. It's completely dry. I just put a light coat of the white on top of it, and I'm just gonna take my sanding block and everywhere where there was wax, that paint is gonna sand off, and you can see how it was pretty aggressively put right there, so that took it right down to the wood. I really like that chippy rustic wood look. I know it's not for everybody, but I really love it. So that's why a lot of my projects, I do this technique on them. I'm just going to sand in the middle here, and then we'll be all ready to finish off the inside. we're going to do some iron-on decoupage. And this was printed off on my inkjet printer. It's a picture from one of our camping adventures, cooking a turkey over the campfire. Now you want to seal your ink when you've used an inkjet. Otherwise, when you apply the Mod Podge on top or underneath, your inks could smear. I just have some aerosol hairspray. You just want to give it a good coat, set it aside, and let it dry. And that will seal all of the ink into your picture. I'm going to be using my Mod Podge mat, and I'm going to put a liberal amount over all of the wood, and then we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to put another coat on, and then we're going to iron on our photo. So that's a pretty good coat on that. I'm going to set this aside and let it dry. We have 2 coats of the Mod Podge completely dry. I'm just going to take my photo and center it exactly where I want it. And then I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper. You want to make sure you're using parchment paper, not wax paper, and make sure everything's nice and smooth. And now I have my iron. I have it set on the highest setting with no steam. And you're just going to just very gently just iron on your photo. And this is fantastic for not having any bubbles or wrinkles, and it works really well. And it just takes a little bit of pressure just to make sure that you've got your photo sealed right on. You can lift up your parchment paper and see how it looks, and do it a little bit more if you think you need it. And we have a perfect photo ironed on to that piece of wood to put in the frame. Now, as a top coat, I don't like to use Mod Podge. I like to use a polyacrylic sealer. Make sure you're using a water-based one. If you're using an oil base, it will yellow on you. So I'm just going to put a light coat over that, and it'll seal it right up really nice. I think this turned out fantastic, and it is exactly what I wanted. I have an adventure wall where I've done a whole bunch of pictures of all the adventures my husband and I have done and been on, and this is going to be added to that wall. Next project is this mail and bill wall hanging. It looks like somebody's done maybe some toll painting, and it's got a little tiny bit of a raised edge on it. I'm going to take it out to my shed and give it a really good sanding so it's nice and smooth, and then bring it back in here and start painting. This is all painted. It took 2 coats of the spray paint, and then I put a light coat of my homemade chalk paint on top. I want to put graphics on it, and my graphics adhere better to a chalk painted surface. This is the graphic that I'm going to use. I'm going to turn this into a cell phone charging area. And I've printed off my graphics on regular computer paper, reverse the text. This graphic is available in my Etsy store if you find these out thrifting and you want to make one for yourself. I'm going to put the charging station up here, and 1 and 2 here. And it's going to keep your cell phones nice and neat and tidy, and you can plug it in. So I'll show you how I'm going to finish it up. I got my graphics all cut out. I'm going to be using my Mod Podge mat, and I'm just going to put a real light coat of the Mod Podge over the graphics, and then center them exactly where I want them. Make sure there's no wrinkles and bubbles. And then I'm going to set it aside until tomorrow, and then we'll rub off the paper and we'll finish this up. Okay, it's the next day, and this is completely dry. I've just got a sponge with a little bit of water on it. I'm just going to lightly dampen that and rub off these graphics. I'm really excited for this project because I always see these little mail holders, mail organizers at the thrift store, and I think this is going to work out perfect. I'm saving this one for myself. It's going to go in my kitchen, and I'm going to be charging my cell phones in it. I have this all done, and I'm going to drill some holes in the sides to fit through my chargers. Now I have a Type-C charger and an iPhone charger, so you want to make sure that you're picking out a drill bit that's going to be big enough for those chargers to go through, and this one's going to work perfect. Now, because this is going to have lots of fingers coming in and out, I want to seal it really well so I can wipe it down with a damp rag if I want to. I'm going to use my engine enamel. This gives it a really durable coating. I'm going to take it out to my shed and give it a really good coat all over the whole project. Now I've got the holes all done, and you can see putting the smaller end in through there, and this is my type C. It fits right through there. And now you can mount it on your wall and charge your cell phones, and it looks pretty. I love this DIY. I think that it just kind of takes a messy looking charging area and makes it nice and pretty, and you can just set your cell phone in there and plug these ends into your wall outlet and you're all set. So keep your eye out for these letter and bill holders and give this DIY a try.
Next upcycle is this little metal pot that I found at the thrift store. The white paint needed to be freshened up a little bit, so I mixed up some of my white homemade chalk paint and I gave it one good coat across that whole pot. And again, anything that I put a little quote on or a little word always sells better for me. So we're gonna do this little quote. I've sized it for my little metal pot, use the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method, and apply it to the pot. Now there's other ways that you can put graphics on your projects. You can do a custom napkin, you can use your Cricut, you can even hand draw, but I just find that this works so well for me and I can put it on so many projects and it's affordable. That's what I love about it. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't have to buy vinyl. You just need computer paper and some Mod Podge, and most of us already have a printer. While I'm waiting for that graphic to dry, I'm going to add some twine along the top of this little pot. I've let it sit for 24 hours, and again, we're dampening it. We're going to now rub off the paper. This can be the trickiest part of this technique, and if you just take your time and you practice a little bit, you can get really good at it. It doesn't take much pressure, and using your fingers works the best so you can feel the paper rubbing off underneath. Once I have all the paper off, again, I'm going to seal it up with my polyacrylic sealer. I love it because you can now dust your project if you want to afterwards. And how cute is this? I think I might have paid 50 cents for it at the thrift store. I've upcycled it. You can put a full plant in it, or you can even plant a real plant in it, and it's perfect to give as a gift.
And this is what I'm going to decoupage. I picked this up, I think, at a yard sale. It was like 50 cents. I tucked it away because I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do with it, and it has so many angles on it. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a coat of my black homemade chalk paint over the whole container. I'm going to distress this after, so that's why I like to put the black paint as the base, because when I distress it and sand it, the black will peek through and give it a little bit more of an aged look. The black chalk paint is all dry, and now I'm going to put a coat of white chalk paint over the whole container. I have a really great homemade chalk paint recipe. I'll put the link for that below in the description. And after I've got this all painted and it's dried, I've taken a 120 grit sandpaper and I'm sanding around all of the edges. Okay, I have the dish all prepped and it's really intricate. So I thought I would do a tutorial to show you how you can decoupage on something that has lots of angles and little bits on it. So this might not be a beginner project, but it's lots of fun to watch. And this is what you're going to need to decoupage. You're going to need some, I like to use my matte Mod Podge, a little bit of saran wrap, napkin that you love, and a little paintbrush. You want to make sure that you're only working with one ply of the napkin. So we're just going to take off the top sheet. I don't get rid of these. I like to make my own custom napkins, and I also use them for cleanup. I'm going to start working on the lid first. So I want to cut a napkin just a little bit bigger than the lid size, and I want to make sure that I have the flower centered in the middle. So I'm just going to cut it out, and then we're ready to decoupage. That looks good. Okay, we're just going to put just a light amount right to the very edges. The mistake that a lot of beginner decoupagers do is putting on too much Mod Podge. If you put too much on, it's gonna wrinkle and bubble for you really easy. So just put a light coat on right to the very edge. And then you're gonna pick up your napkin. You can't move the napkin after you've put it on. Put it exactly where you want it. Lightly press it down. I like using my saran wrap. And then just press it down to get all the wrinkles and bubbles out. And then I'm just gonna take my scissors and just kind of cut off some of that. I have a lot of extra there I don't need on. That's hanging off. And then once this is dry, then we will sand off all this extra around the edges and it'll look nice and neat and tidy. I'm gonna set the lid aside and let it dry, and I'm gonna start working on these panels. Same thing, we're gonna cut out a piece of napkin, the size that we need, and then just Mod Podge it on. These don't have to be perfectly cut out. You just want a smaller size so it's easier to work with. Here's a little trick if you have something that is kind of moving around on you. I love these little lint rollers. I use this with my Cricut. Stick it on your table and then stick your project on and it's not going to move on you. Paint on your Mod Podge right to the edge. Now I don't want my Mod Podge to hang over the edge of this, so I'm just putting it right to the edge because I'm going to do it in panels. I'm going to press it down exactly where I want it. Get my saran wrap, press it down. That looks perfect. Now, before I do this one, I want to let this one dry. So I'm going to go on to this one here, and then I'm just going to work my way around. I've set this aside and I've let it dry. It's all dry completely. Now, before I sand off all these little edges, I like to put a top coat on. I don't like using Mod Podge as a top coat. I find that it does introduce some bubbles and wrinkles a little bit easier than if I just use my polyacrylic sealer. So that's what I'm going to use as a top coat. This one's a satin base. You can use whatever base you want. Make sure you're using a water-based polyacrylic sealer, or your projects will yellow on you if you use an oil-based. I find if you try to sand these edges off before you put a top coat on, you can tear at the napkin. So by putting the top coat on and then sanding, you can have a cleaner edge. And I'm just going to put the polyacrylic on the top of this. I'm doing this kind of in sections because I also want to put the napkins on these, but I want to finish these panels first before I do the next one, or it's going to be too difficult to finish up. So less is more when you're putting on a top coat. If you put on too much, it's going to bubble and wrinkle on you. So I just like to put a light coat right to the edge, set it aside, let it dry, and then we're going to sand off the extra around the edge. Now it's completely dry, and I'm taking my 120 grit sandpaper and I'm sanding off all of those extra edges and making it nice and neat and clean. I've got it all done. And I think I want to decoupage. I'm going to leave this white, but I think I want to decoupage these. So that's what I'm going to work on next. I have this all sanded and ready for the panels to be done. So let's get to work. For these smaller pieces, I want to make sure I cut out a piece of the flower to have on it. So I'm just going to go piece by piece. This is kind of tedious, but it's going to look beautiful when it's done. So we're just going to get the Mod Podge again. Just put a little bit on that little panel. Press on your napkin exactly where you want it. Smooth out any wrinkles or bubbles. You can use a saran wrap if you want to help it along. And then I'm going to do the same as what I did on the base. I'm going to go every other. Let these dry and then add the next ones in. So I'm just going to work away at that. Now I'm going to add these panels on. Same process. I've got them all done and I'm going to set them aside, let them dry again, put the top coat on. All completely dry on those other panels, so now I'm going to put the coat of polyacrylic sealer on those and then set it aside and let it dry. A few steps, but it's going to be worth it in the end and it's going to be beautiful. So every other one that I did this time, putting a coat of the polyacrylic sealer, just a light coat. Remember, less is more when you're putting on a top coat because you don't want to introduce any bubbles and wrinkles. And then we're going to set it aside and let it dry again. That one's done. I'll put the top coat on these ones. Okay, let's them dry. Nice and neat, and I've got these edges all finished. Now I'm ready to do these ones. All dry, let's do the last bit of sanding. One little tip when you're sanding is sand away from the project, and that way you won't be pulling up the napkin in case there's a little bit that didn't adhere very well. And I try to just to pull it that way and it'll prevent that. And see how I'm going this way on this one. And it just pulls that napkin right away and leaves a really nice finished edge. You have to be a little bit patient, but I'll show you. See how nice of an edge that gives? I'm just going in now and just touching up the inside a little bit with the black chalk paint. When I was doing all that sanding, it kind of pooled a little bit along the edges, so I just wanted to clean it up a little bit and put another coat on, and it just makes it look a little bit nicer and a little bit more finished. And I'm going to do the same with the lid too. Put another coat all along the top. I'm not going to worry about the edges because I want to keep them kind of that distressed look, but I just want to neaten up the paint in the middle. And now you can see why I wanted to paint the black on the first layer, because when you sand, it peeks through that black and it kind of gives it that antique kind of old look, which I love. I know it's not for everybody, but I really love the rustic look. And by doing that base coat black, it just gives it that extra little touch. Now I have this all finished, but I have something that I like to do with projects that I use all the time. This is going to be mine. I'm going to keep my rings and earrings in it, and I want to seal it really well. So what I like to use is this premium automotive acrylic enamel. It seals it up rock hard, so you can wipe it, you can dust it. Almost makes it waterproof, and I love using it. So this is a gloss formula, and I kind of want to have this have a really glossy sheen to it too. You can find this in automotive stores. I'm in Canada. We have a store called Canadian Tire. You can find it in there, or you can sometimes find it even on Amazon. I'll put a link down below and you can check out that link. So I'm going to take this outside and I'm going to spray it with this acrylic enamel. I am going to finish it off with this little knob I had in my stash, and I think it matches beautiful. I'm using some E6000 to glue it on the top. We're gonna let it dry, and I'll show you the finished project. This might be one of my favorite decoupage projects that I've ever done. I found the napkins at HomeSense. I absolutely love them. I love the way it's rustic and chippy. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm gonna work on this little plaque. It had, I think it had some sort of a quote on it, probably from the 70s. And a long time ago, I put a coat of white chalk paint on it, set it aside, and never finished it. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to fill in this little hole because I want to put a little hanger at the back. I don't want to hang it through this here. So I've just got some wood filler, and I'm just going to fill up that hole and let it dry. I've got the hole all filled in and it's dry, and I just sanded it down. I have a nice flat piece of wood now, and I'm going to give it a coat of my homemade white chalk paint. I got it all painted, and then I sanded it down with some 80 grit sandpaper, and I love the little scalloped edge on it. I'm going to pick out a really nice quote to put on this. I designed this graphic last week, and I love it. It's reversed right now because I printed it off on just regular computer paper on my laser jet, and I'm going to use the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. But it's got a lot of farmhouse vibes, and I'm going to put it on this plaque. Okay, this is sat for 24 hours. I've got a little dish of water. Just gonna wet it until you can just start to see the graphics show through, and then rub off the paper. We're gonna be left with a really cute tea lover sign. That little wooden vintage plaque that I picked up at the thrift store turned into this beautiful sign. I think this would look great in a tiered tray or on a coffee and tea bar. And I love the graphic. And those little beveled edges finished it off completely. The next thing that I'm going to work on is this charger plate. I picked it up at a thrift store. I think it was $1. And it's regularly $2.47 from Walmart. It's a pretty heavy duty one. A long time ago, took it out in my shed and I gave it a coat of primer. When you're doing anything with plastic, I like to use that spray primer first. The bin works perfect as a primer, and then you can paint anything on top of it because it has that primer to adhere to. So I'm going to paint it black with some of my baking soda paint. I got one coat of the black chalk paint on, and then I remembered I had a little tiny bit of some of this gray sand paint left over from a project that I did last week on a vase. I want to use it up, and I think it's going to look nice on this. So I'm going to put the next couple coats, I'm going to use this paint up. The first coat is dried, and now I'm going to put a second coat on, and it has some really great texture to it. I love this, using this paint. It kind of gives everything kind of that stoneware look, and you can use a terracotta color, you can use white, black, and it looks fantastic. So with my last coat, I just like to pat it on because then it gives it a little bit more texture, and we'll be finished with this painting. My sand paint is all dry on that charging plate, and I just love the texture that it makes. It just takes a plain, ordinary piece to the next level. So what I'm going to do with this charging plate, I painted the back of it. I have this wooden bowl that I've collected. I collect way too many wooden bowls. I'm going to use my E6000 and glue it on the bottom, and it's going to make a really nice raised plate that will be perfect for a table centerpiece. The texture that this sand paint makes is fabulous. If you haven't mixed up this recipe, you need to try it. That little bowl on the bottom just raised it up a little bit, and I love it on my kitchen table. Next project, I have this vase that I picked up at a yard sale. Not really loving the color of it, but I love the pattern on it, so I want to keep the pattern. I'm going to mix up some of my baking soda paint, and I have some terracotta colored latex paint that I'm going to mix into the baking soda paint. I really love this color. I've used it quite a bit on some of my other projects, and I think it's going to make this kind of look like a terracotta vase. So I'm going to mix that up and get painting. The first coat's all dry, and I love how it left the texture and made it even pop a little bit more than when it was just the glass. Second coat, I'm going to use a sponge and sponge it on, and I think that will cover it better. That's exactly what I was wanting, and I love how the pattern showed through really well after I painted it, and I love this color. Fantastic, successful upcycle. We're now going to work on this welcome sign. It was $4.99 at Value Village. I'm going to take off all of those hooks, and we're going to do a burning decoupage method on this sign. If you've been following along, you've probably seen me do this technique before. It works fabulous, and it eliminates having to do a lot of sanding when you're decoupaging into those little intricate areas. I'm using 1 ply of a napkin and our Mod Podge, and we're going to decoupage it onto that welcome sign. We are going to be using a lighter and a flame. Make sure you have a squirt bottle full of water handy, and you're doing this in a well-ventilated area. I'm out in my shed with the door open. If you're going to do it in your home, maybe you could do it over your kitchen sink, and just be really careful with it. I'm going to put the Mod Podge over the whole welcome sign and then lay that napkin down in it, smooth it out, and make sure we get rid of all of the bubbles and wrinkles. So I have to use 2 napkins because this is a little bit of a bigger project. So I want to make sure when I'm laying down that second napkin that I make sure that it's all lined up. And if you've never tried this technique, you need to give it a try because it is game changer and so much fun. I'm just going to cut away as much of the extra napkin as I can because you don't want to have too much napkin when you're burning it away, or it'll flame up too much and it'll scorch around your letters. And the other thing is you want to work quickly because when we do put the lighter to it, we want to make sure that that Mod Podge is still wet. You don't want the Mod Podge to dry or it won't work properly. I've just taken the end of my scissors where there's little holes in between the letters, and then you're just going to take your lighter and just light that napkin on fire, and you'll see as we watch it, it'll form all around those letters right into those little nooks and crannies. And your flame may go out, and when it does, you can just start again, and to get into those little holes in between the letters, like I did before, poke a little hole and then just put the lighter in, light it, and it'll form right around that whole letter. This is so fun to watch, and it's almost mesmerizing. I sealed that all up with some polyacrylic sealer and put the hooks back on, and then I had this big piece of baseboard that I'm going to mount the welcome on. I just feel that it makes it look a little bit more sturdy and more expensive looking having this on a background. And I love the way that it turned out, and using that burning technique made it nice and speedy. I love when I find these, but I'm never really fussy on the inside of them. They're always kind of dirty and yucky. So I like to take it all apart and take it right down to the wood. And it sometimes can be a little bit of a job to get it all taken apart. It can be glued in there pretty good, but it's worthwhile taking the time if you don't like it to take all of this out. So I'm going to work away at that. Okay. This is not for the faint of heart. It is a lot of work to get this out, and I probably have been a half an hour scraping everything out. I used my putty knife, I used an X-Acto knife, and then when I was all finished, I went through and I sanded everything down, It doesn't look really smooth, but it is. I've got it all smooth and all of the glue and everything scraped off. It's a mess, but it's so worth it when it's done. They turn out so cute. We're all ready to paint it. It has a little bit of a shiny lacquer on it. So I'm going to take my sanding block and sand it all down. So it gives it a little bit of a rough surface. I've got my homemade white chalk paint, and then I'm going to paint everything inside and out. It'll probably take 2 really good coats. My jewelry box took 2 coats of the white chalk paint and it covered really well. This kind of crackled a little bit. I think there was probably a little bit of glue that was still left on it, but that's okay because I'm going to decoupage a really pretty scrapbook piece of paper in the bottom here and here. And you know that I love that distressed look. So I'm going to take my sander and distress this up a little bit before I put some graphics on the top. I gave it a little bit of distressing, not a whole lot, just a little bit to make it look kind of vintage and old. And I didn't realize I took all the innards out and now this little tray doesn't work because it was sitting on top of some foam. I'm going to save this for another project because I'll keep this open for storage for the whole thing. So I'm going to now put in some scrapbooking paper. I'm going to decoupage in this to kind of spruce it up a little bit. I love this scrapbook paper. It has a real vintage old look and I have 3 sheets of it. So I'm going to have lots to do this project. I'm going to measure out the top and the bottom here, the size that I need, and then decoupage it right in. I got everything cut to size. It's a real shabby chic kind of look. I love that scrapbooking paper. I cut it with my paper cutter and a ruler so I could get it nice and exact. And I'm going to use my Mod Podge mat to decoupage it in. I've got a really pretty quote that I'm going to put on the top. Today only happens once, make it amazing. I love that. And I think it suits the inside look. And I've done this on regular computer paper, made sure I've reversed the text. This graphic's available on my Etsy store if you want to grab it. And I'm going to use my Mod Podge to put it on. Okay, this is the next day. It's all dry. I have my little dish of water and I'm just going to just dampen it so we can just start to see the letters show through. And we're going to rub this paper all off. I got all the paper rubbed off. It's nice and dry. I'm going to seal it up with some of my polyacrylic sealer, water-based. This is matte finish, and it'll seal it up really nice. So if we ever need to dust it, it will work well. I think this turned out adorable. And you can only imagine all the different scrapbooking papers that you can choose from. So many different themes and quotes that you can put on them. And they make fantastic gifts. So let me know down in the comments which project today was your favorite. And if you really liked this video, I'm sure you'll probably like the next one. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. Cutest little wooden fish at the thrift store. Knew I could upcycle it. I'm going to turn it into a sign. I've got this piece of wood that I saved out of a scrap wood pile, and I love the rough edges on it. So let's get started. First step, I'm gonna leave the live edge, but I wanna put some black chalk paint in the middle. So I'm just gonna paint up to the edge, the whole piece of wood. The black's all dry. We're gonna get out our candle wax. This is just a pillar candle, and I'm gonna rub it all along that black because I want to make that paint nice and chippy. I'm going to layer up a couple different colors. I've just got some acrylic paint. My yellow's almost gone, but I think I have enough I want it to complement the yellow and the green in the fish. Everything's completely dry, and I warmed up the wax, and now I'm going to get out my scraper and I'm going to scrape away, and as you do, it leaves a fantastic rustic finish. I designed this graphic, printed it on my LaserJet printer, reversed the text. If you want to grab it, it's available in my Etsy store. I'm going to use my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method and apply it to the sign. Our sign has sat overnight. I've just got a little rag with a little bit of water on it, just dampening the paper until you can just start to see the graphics show through, and then we're going to rub off all of the paper. All the paper is rubbed off. We're going to seal it up with a polyacrylic sealer. I'm now going to glue on my fish with some E6000 and some hot glue to keep it in place. And then I'm going to set it aside and let it dry completely. Put on a little bit of hot glue just to hold it in place, and that'll give it a really good bond. Place it exactly where I want it. We're going to let it dry. And there's the cutest Gone Fishing sign. Beautifully distressed wood. I love the graphic. I think anybody that was a fisherman would love this sign. Old cutting board. It had some sort of a painted stencil or graphic on it that was really worn down and looked like it had been well loved. So I am going to give it a upcycle. I'm going to really aggressively sand off that graphic, and it actually was kind of hard to get off because the ink had really soaked into the wood. Used my 80 grit sandpaper and a little bit of time and patience, and I got it all off. When I'm doing a graphic transfer onto raw wood, I like to use my polyacrylic sealer. So that's what we're going to do on this project. I have this graphic of Grandma's apple pie, and I'm going to apply it to the cutting board with some polyacrylic sealer. I'm going to set it aside. I've let it dry. It doesn't take as long as in Mod Podge, just takes a couple hours. So it's all dry now. I'm going to dampen the paper and rub it off, and we're going to be left with this really cute graphic on this cutting board. I'm going to seal it up with my matte clear polyacrylic sealer, and it'll be ready to display in my kitchen. Now, the reason I use the polyacrylic sealer method with this is I find the Mod Podge, it shows a bit on raw wood where this blends in better, and you don't have that outline of the Mod Podge when you do that type of a transfer. Love the way that this turned out. You could do up one of your favorite recipes and apply it to a cutting board. Such an easy DIY. This would also be perfect to do up for a gift and use one of your favorite recipes to share with a friend or a loved one. I picked up this at the thrift store. It's got some rubber legs. It needs to have a good cleaning and sanded down a little bit. And I think I'm going to do some ticking stripes on this and make it into kind of a farmhouse field tray. I've got it all sanded down and clean, and I'm going to give it a coat of my homemade white chalk paint. I'm not going to distress this. I'm going to leave this a solid white color. I put 3 coats of my white chalk paint on this, and I've got some painter's tape, and I'm going to put a ticking stripe on this side. I got it all painted on and it's all dry. I think I want to distress around the edges, so I'm going to take it out to my shed and give it a really good sanding. All distressed, and I love it. And if you've been following along, you know I can't leave anything alone. I always have to have that rustic feel to it. I'm going to seal this up really well because it's going to have stuff sat on it probably in the kitchen, and I want to seal it with some engine enamel. This will give it a really durable coating, so if anything spills on it, it'll wipe off easy. I'm going to take it outside and give it a really good spray. I love the striping on this. I think it turned out really nice. Added a plant to it. Looks perfect on our table. I love finding things at the thrift store that I can take apart and repurpose and upcycle into other things. This foot massager is a prime example. I was able to take it apart really easy with a couple bangs with a hammer, and I have all these pieces now to create other things from. Some skewers, we got all kinds of big huge beads, and the first thing I'm going to do with them is I picked up these little wooden bowls. I'm going to use 2 of those big beads and some E6000, and we're going to create some really cute trinket dishes. I'm just going to take my E6000, put a little bit of glue on the bottom of that one bead, and then attach it to the bottom of one of the wooden bowls. And then I'm going to put some E6000 on the top of the bead and put another bowl facing up on the top. When you're in the thrift store scouring around, always look for unusual things that would be made from beads that you could take apart and repurpose into new items. I'm just going to put a little more E6000 on the top and secure that top little dish and let it dry completely. And these turned into really cute little trinket dishes. You can put little bracelets or your earrings or rings in and display them really pretty. Next, upcycle. This folk art wall sconce. I am really torn with this because I always hate painting over somebody else's artwork. Somebody has taken a lot of time with this toll painting, and I just can't bring myself to paint over it. So I'm actually going to take the shelf off of it. I'm going to keep it as is, and that will be the bottom of my project. I just put a little bit of wood filler in those 3 screw holes, and we're ready to paint it. I'm going to save this little shelf bit and turn it into something a little bit later. I'm going to paint it with some black chalk paint. And I'm also going to paint that little shelf with some black chalk paint while I have it on the go. Now I'm going to take some candle wax and just go around the edges of that board, just so when I paint on top of it and I sand it away, it'll give that distressed look. Next coat, I have some gray chalk paint that I'm going to layer on top of that black. We're going to get out the Elmer's glue because we're going to do a crackle effect on the top of this board. If you've been following around here for a while, you've seen me do this crackle technique quite a bit. I love the way it gives a piece of wood that vintage aged look. We're just going to spread that Elmer's glue across that whole board in long strokes. I've let the Elmer's glue sit for about 30 seconds to a minute just to get a little bit tacky, and then I'm going to brush on my white. The key to having a successful crackle on your project is to do long strokes and not work that paint into the glue very much, and then you'll get a perfect crackle. And it's all crackled and it turned out perfect. I love it, and we still have all that toll painting on the back that we saved. Some more of those beads from the foot massager. We're going to E6000 glue them onto the bottom of the board. Love the way that this turned out. Created a beautiful cutting board that's decor for the middle of our table. Now back to that foot massager again. This is the bottom of the foot massager and the 2 sides. I glued it together with some E6000, painted it with some black chalk paint, and now I'm painting it with this beautiful turquoise color, and it just turned it into a little mini tiered tray that you can keep a little vase, and I've just got a little plant that I'm propagating in it. I always love when I find these galvanized buckets and pails. Always pick them up because I love to upcycle them. And when I do find them and I upcycle them, they're probably one of my best sellers. And I think this bucket was probably an old water jug. It's not in the greatest shape, so that's why I'm going to upcycle it. If I do find these and they still have really good bones and they have a beautiful graphic on them, I don't touch them, but this one needed some TLC. I'm going to put a graphic on using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. This graphic's available in my Etsy store. If you want to do a project like this for yourself, you can head over there after this video and check it out. I'm also not going to paint this. I love the patina of the red on the top and I love the metal color of the bottom. Now when you're doing anything that's really ribbed, when you put your graphic on, you want to press that paper right into the rib of your project, or when you go to remove your graphic, you're not going to have a really good transfer because you're going to lose all of that lettering in between the ribs. So really work it carefully into that project. I've let this dry overnight and I'm just taking a damp rag with a little bit of water on it, dampening the paper till you can just start to see the graphic show through and rubbing off all of that paper. Now doing a transfer method on a ribbed surface like this can prove to be a little bit tricky, but if you just take your time and just slowly rub the paper away, you can have a beautiful looking graphic on your project and it'll definitely be worth the effort. I like to just do small sections at a time, just slowly rubbing the paper away. This is never a perfect transfer. You're always going to have bits and pieces that are going to rub off, but I think it just gives it character. Sealed everything up with a polyacrylic sealer, and it's ready to put a plant in or some fresh flowers and display on your porch or your deck or even in your home. 2 beads from the foot massager and that shelf off the toll painting. I'm going to turn this into a little cute sign for our patio. I'm going to use my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method to put some graphics on, let it sit for 24 hours, and now it's ready to have the paper rubbed off. This has been really fun because I've taken that foot massager and I've taken it apart and I've created so many different projects with it, and all it cost was $3.99 from Value Village, and I had a coupon too for 30% off. So perfect upcycling and repurposing happening here. Relax and unwind. You're on patio time. Okay, now I'm going to work on this home sign. I actually had an idea in my head of what I was going to do with it, and then I had one of my followers in the comments give me an idea, and it inspired me to change what I was going to do with it. They had left a message and said, I think you should turn that into a little dog sign, somewhere to hang a leash and to hang a little dog jacket, and to make the graphics love with the O being a dog paw. And I thought that's brilliant. That will work perfect for this. So changed my thought, and this is what I'm going to do. So thank you for your idea and your inspiration. I love when you guys go down in my comments and help me out with this kind of stuff. I've just got a little piece of wax. I'm going to go around the outside, so when I do distress it, it'll help it along and make it look even more rustic and chippy. Now I'm going to put a coat of homemade chalk paint on. Also put some painter's tape on those hooks, so when I did spray paint it, I didn't get any overspray on the hooks. Once it was completely dry, I sanded it down with my palm sander using some 80 grit sandpaper, and I printed off my graphics, and we're ready to put them on with the Mod Podge. All the graphics that I'm using today you can grab out of my Etsy store. Make sure you use the code SAVE50 and you can get 50% off of all of the graphics over there. I set it aside and let it dry, and now it's the next day, and we're just going to dampen it until you can just start to see the graphics through, and then we're going to rub off all of that paper. If you've been following along here for a while, you know I love this way to transfer graphics onto your project. It's so affordable, and it takes a little bit of practice in the beginning, but once you get the hang of it, it is fantastic, and the possibilities are endless. This technique does work best with a laser jet printer, but if you do have an inkjet, it'll still work with a little bit of practice. And this turned out adorable. My little Yorkie Tina is going to love this, someplace to hang up her little jacket and her little leash. This project was also inspired by quite a few people down in my comments. I'm going to turn it into a cloche. I have an old spindle. I'm going to cut the top off, and I have an old piece of wood that I traced out a circle that's a little bit bigger than the vase, and I cut a piece off the top of that spindle. We're going to use the E6000 to glue it onto the top so it creates a little bit of a handle. I had a plate, and the circumference of the plate was just a little bit bigger than the vase, so I traced it around this old piece of wood, and I'm just going to use my jigsaw and just cut out that circle. Once I got it cut out, I took my sander and gave it a really good sanding, and I love the way that it made the grain in the wood pop out. I'm not going to paint it, I'm going to use it the natural wood color. And I had a smaller circle that I'm going to glue on the bottom of it, so when I do set it on a dresser or a table, it's going to raise it up a little bit. Once the glue was completely dried, I sealed it up with a couple coats of my polyacrylic sealer. And I think this turned out darling. I had a little sign that I put in it that I'd made. I had an old antique book and some faux greenery. Set it on top of that wooden circle, and it pulled it all together. I love it. And that spindle on the top finishes it off perfectly. We are going to upcycle these salt and pepper shakers. Always see these at the thrift store. Next time you see one, you're going to want to pick up a set after you see how I'm going to upcycle this. Now, these are some curtain hooks that I had that I actually tried to rust. If you didn't see my rust video, you can check that out afterwards. It was kind of a bust, but I did have some things that worked really well and rusted. These curtain rings were one of them. Now, I've just spray painted these salt and pepper shakers just with some matte white spray paint, and now I'm just, well, it's still tacky, rolling it in dirt. I'm trying to make these salt and pepper shakers look like stone or like cement. So I'm going to do a couple different layers of colors and put a little bit of the clear coat on. Then I'm going to rub in a bit more dirt. Then I'm going to put on some more white spray paint, just kind of layering until I get that stone look. Now, this is going to look worse before it looks better, but I love incorporating that dirt or that sand into this because it just gives it that texture that we want to make this look more authentic. Just layering up a little bit of white spray paint, letting that dry, maybe rubbing on a little bit more dirt, putting on a little bit of the clear coat, and then putting on a little bit of the black, just until you like the look of it. That's what I am trying to achieve, is like that marble stone look. I've got them all finished. I like the way that it looks, and now I've got some old rusty wire. I'm going to cut two pieces the exact same length, and they are going to be attached to these little claws off of those curtain rings. Hang tight, because when you see this all put together, you're going to love it. I'm just going to cut that claw off of that curtain ring, and then we're going to glue it onto that piece of wire. And I'm going to make two of them, one for each salt and pepper shaker. I'm using my super glue from Gorilla. It works fantastic, and it bonds metal to metal really well. I'm going to place that wire exactly where I want it, put the glue down, and then set it aside and let it dry completely. They're completely dry now, and we are going to put those right in the top of that salt and pepper shaker. And this is what I created, a beautiful spot to put some vintage looking photos or a little piece of artwork and display in your home. And you can use more than one piece of wire and put in multiple photos into these little salt and pepper shakers. I love this idea. Our first project by updating this old vase. It has a nice pattern, but I don't really care for the color, and the handle had been previously broken and fixed. So luckily I picked it up for $7.99, and it had an additional 50% off, so that was a really great deal. But we're going to add some texture to this using my homemade sand paint. If you have not painted with sand paint before, you need to give this a try. The texture is fabulous. I had this old tester that's almost like a cement color, and some sand, and we're going to mix it all together. I have a full tutorial for this recipe. I'll put the link down below in the description, and you can watch that after you watch this video. So I'm just incorporating it all together, and then I'm just going to paint my entire vase. This adheres really well to any surface because the base of it is chalk paint, so you don't need to worry about it chipping or peeling off. Revamping thrift store finds that don't match your home decor is such a breeze with maybe just even a simple coat of paint or a color change, and it's amazing how you can give them a fresh new look and take something that's really dated and vintage looking into something that looks modern and fits your home decor better. As you can see, this homemade sand paint is already turning this vase into a beautiful piece that's not dated anymore. While we're waiting for that to dry, I picked up this candle for $1.99, and again, it was 50% off, and I have some of this paint left over, so I'm just going to paint it the same color that we did the vase. First coat's on. I'm going to set this aside and let it dry. To speed up the painting process, a heat gun on low setting can come in handy for drying the paint quickly before you add the second coat. As for the second coat of sand paint, I prefer to dab it on to create more texture, either by pouncing the brush or using a sponge. And now that the first coat on the vase is dry, I'll apply the second coat by pouncing that sand paint onto it. I stumbled upon the paint I used in this project in the Oops section at Home Depot. That's a great place to scout for affordable paint deals. It's always worth checking out. I sealed both of these projects with some spray polyacrylic sealer. And check out these transformations. They no longer look dated, and they have more of a modern look that blends perfectly with my home decor. And best of all, I was able to accomplish this on a budget.